Friends and family of Karens, what's it like? I divorced Karen. I haven't had to see a manager since. Thank you. But it is my favorite when family members or boyfriends swing by later to tell me they're sorry for Karen's behavior and that I'm actually doing a great job. Why are we even asking this question? None of them are actually here. They're on shared Facebook accounts named Karen and Dave Smith. My mum is a literal Karen, as in it's in her name, but she's like a bizarro Karen. She'll constantly ask to speak with managers and supervisors and bosses, but when said managers arrive, she unloads about the employees helping her out being fantastic, hardworking, and friendly. And then she'll spend 20 minutes trying to figure out if she and the manager know someone in common. 9 times out of 10, they do. As a kid, it would embarrass me, and as an adult, it's one of my favorite things about her. She makes people feel good about the work they do, and it's really special to watch how wonderful she makes people feel. Plus, she's got long, gorgeous silver hair. My sister is also a Karen. She spent her life working with the disabled and is currently an essential worker. It is the absolute best. I love my wife. I didn't write that. My sister is a Karen. Everyone feels so sorry for her husband. Everything is his fault. He's treated like a slave. She only addresses him by yelling. She constantly insults him. We have no idea why he hasn't divorced her or flipped out and attacked her. We've all told her to cool it, and her response is that he's just so dumb. I could go on, but my sister is really a horrible person. You know, I don't think there'll be any actual Karen husbands writing in here. They're probably all on Facebook. And I don't think they have profiles, at least ones under their own names. I think they're only on Facebook in their partner's pictures. Also, as the narrator has done in the past, he'd like to clarify that this story grouping is open for both female Karens and their male counterparts, the Kens. I married someone with a Karen for a sister. Sister-in-law is the frickin' worst. I hate more than anything going out to dinner with her, listening to her order food and talk to servers. Holidays are also terrible. She sends out long lists of expected gifts. She celebrates every holiday and birthday specifically for presents, even when it's not appropriate. The funny thing is, one time I was away from the dinner table when the bill came, and my sister-in-law waited for me to return to pay the bill by actually handing it to me. She didn't give it to her sibling or my partner, or pay her half, but expressly handed it to me to pay. By the way, her husband is an idiot and they're a match made in heaven. And I'm sorry to disappoint everyone, but yes, I did pay. There are many reasons as to why, but the biggest one is that it got me out of the restaurant faster. Also, it helps me control the tip. Another time we went to a family brunch where the bill was split. Karen's sister-in-law waited to see what other people tipped so she could lower the overall tip percentage for the waitress to what sister-in-law thought was deserving. We didn't know this until afterwards, when she bragged about it later, so no one even knew to stop her. And she's invited to these family meals because she has 2 children that we actually want a relationship with. So she has that emotional blackmail card. I'm not married to one, but my mom was a major Karen back when I was growing up. "Mom, can we just go?" was my favorite expression, then the apologetic nod as we left the store. I really relate to this. All throughout my childhood it happened. I remember being an embarrassed 11-year-old walking around apologizing for my mom's behavior in stores and restaurants, and it sucked. It's supposed to be the other way around. "Damn it, Mom, stop being a little bag of crap, it's my turn." Precisely. Frick you, Mum. Stop making racially channeled attacks on the minimum wage waiter. I want to unscrew the lid on all the salts and take a massive crap in my pants because I'm not allowed ice cream for a main course. Instead, I have to go, "I'm really sorry about Mom. She's been unwell and doesn't mean it. I'm so sorry." I mean, it's funny now, but actually kinda sad in my memory. That stuff leaves marks under the surface. I had to be a full-time carer and adult at 11. I sometimes feel like I didn't get to be a kid for long enough. I know a couple with a Karen. She blamed him for everything. The husband was, in our opinion, something of a saint. Once she broke a glass in the kitchen, came back and sat down at the table and said, "That was your fault." We all just stared at her. She looked sheepish and said, "I knew that one probably wouldn't work." They're divorced now. I guess even saintliness has its limits. My husband's ex is a Karen. She's a classic narcissist. When one of our feral hens started acting aggressive towards other hens, my stepson named her Karen. Honestly, she's perfect. She makes me so happy. Help me! My mum is a Karen, literally overreacts to everything. Whenever something doesn't go her way, you guessed it, gotta speak to the manager or whoever's in charge. Sometimes it's really embarrassing to go out in public with her because she'll just yell at the service workers for the smallest of things. Also, she does have a bob cut. My mum was a Karen for a while. She literally didn't realize it until my brother and I started calling her out on it when we were early teens because we were embarrassed. She made genuine efforts to change, and a few years later, she's the sweetest woman you've ever met. I'm just saying there's hope. My aunt is a Karen, and my uncle is this soft-spoken giant. He never stands up to her in any way, except once. It was at their daughter's wedding. She was about to interrupt the ceremony to close a window because she was chilly. Everyone sitting close could hear her whisper, "I'm gonna do it, but I don't want to be a jerk." My uncle, in a calm, quiet tone, says quickly, "Why stop now?" Almost as if his filter just missed this one. I swear I could hear my dad snort 2 rows back trying to hold in his laughter. Karen was not happy. I taught my nephews, ages 9 and 11, about Karens last year when they stayed with us for a week after school let out. After describing traits and observing them in the wild, they asked somewhere around day 2, Is our mum a Karen? My reply were, "Your words, not mine." It's a weird clash between the need to be respectful and not undermine someone as a parent, and to call out bad behavior when you see it. I don't know if this was a good thing to do, but at least the kid might resolve to not grow up to exhibit some of these behaviors. My mum can be difficult sometimes, but isn't a Karen. When my sister and I were in our mid-20s, my mum had to start caring for our grandma. After a particularly stressful Saturday afternoon at my grandma's home, we were all carpooling back to my mum's place, and she said to my sister and I, "If I ever start acting like grandma, you'd better tell me." My sister and I sat there in complete silence. After a couple of beats, she yelled, "I do not act like my mother!" It made my sister and I laugh until we cried, mostly because, yes, she did and does act like her mother. My mum's a Karen. She's self-aware that she is a Karen. My siblings and I sent her memes about it. When my stepdad divorced her last summer, we were all amazed he lasted 17 years, to be honest. None of us like going out with her. It's terrible. And my husband just straight up tells her, "No, you aren't talking to the manager when we go in a place." I'll tell you guys a story my stepfather told us. They're farmers and they own a small beef and bee farm. They have a store they go to for bee supplies. The owner called my stepdad and asked him to please be the one to pick up their stuff because his staff was tired of dealing with my mum. He's the only one who went to the store for the next 5 years. My close friend's parents are jerks, but she's really sweet. She learned bad behavior from parents, so she'd be super rude when we went out if she didn't get her way, but never to her friends. I told her about it and she was sort of receptive but didn't really get it. So I started pointing it out at restaurants. "Mary, that was super rude, what the frick, dude?" "Dude, Mary, chill!" Stuff like that. Probably really annoying, but I made my point. She very quickly realized she was being a jerk and she changed. If someone is a good person but they're being a jerk, it helps to have a chat first. Maybe they just don't realize it. My mum is a Karen. She thinks the world is supposed to cater to her, serve her, and everyone else is wrong. Once we went to Carl's Jr. and she ordered 4 burgers for the 4 of us. She pulls one out of the bag while the guy is getting our drinks and she hides the burger. She complains that he forgot a burger. She pulls them out one by one and counts it out in front of him. It's obviously missing because she hid it, and he's swearing up and down that he put them all in the bag. I'm stunned, speechless, and it happened so fast. She got a free burger and laughed as we drove off. I was just staring at her and she opened it up and ate it on the drive home. She ate her actual burger like the 5th one never existed. I can't even explain how she is when she's in the hospital. She treats it like it should be a luxury stay in a hotel. Married to one. She doesn't get why people think Karens complain so much. It's annoying for her and she'd like to talk to someone about this. 4 years of a toxic relationship, luckily unmarried. I broke up with her on Monday, again. We're kind of screwed financially because of this lockdown, so we're just feeling things out for a month before we decide for sure. This is a cycle on repeat. I constantly have to cut her off and speak over her because of the way she treats people. Waiters, sale assistants, gym staff, neighbors, landlords, randoms we meet in bars. We were both waiters at the beginning of our relationship, so she's worked in the industry, but she still lacks empathy. She blames the waiter if something is out of stock. My second major issue is that we're now both English second language teachers. She teaches kindergarten while I teach high school. Now that we're both working from home, I hear how she speaks to her students, and it's really opened up another aspect of her personality that I just don't like. She'll berate a student for not understanding instead of evaluating her ability to explain. Shouting at 3-year-olds in their second language just doesn't fly with me. A lot of her behavior stems from a self-defense mechanism due to insecurity, but that's not an excuse. She doesn't realize how mean she is to people, including myself. I'm a people pleaser that would rather sacrifice my own comfort than someone else's, and she expects me to be a jerk to people because I'm a big guy with tattoos. I don't exactly look soft. It's toxic as heck. Please help. Oh, and the hardest part about this breakup? Our bedroom life is so good it rivals most adult films. Easily. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My mom is absolutely one. I spend most of my time with her in public apologizing to people after she's walked away. The one and only time it comes in handy is when I've bought cars and had her come in during the price negotiation phase. She's knocked off thousands purely due to how unpleasant she is and how much people want her to just get the heck out the door. Please help me, everyone. I'm sorry, you'll need to speak to the manager. I'd say the two biggest categories we have in the answers that we've received here are, first, people venting about their mothers whilst also trying not to be too mean, and then these hilarious joke hostage messages. At least I hope they're jokes. Otherwise, my God, you poor souls. Dated a male Karen for 8 years. He was a semi-successful business owner who was twice my age, and I was young and dumb, for lack of a better word. The gist of our relationship was him trying to take over every part of my life. For instance, he'd order for me at restaurants and would dissuade me if I wanted to try something new. If I had a problem with something, it would be brushed off, but if he had a problem, then, you guessed it, he had to talk to a manager. Not knowing any better, I just thought he was very particular, and even started copying some of his tendencies, like speaking up when I felt like I wasn't getting the right service when I was out on my own. I realized who he was when we were flying back from Vegas and our luggage was heavier than when we flew in. Obviously, we'd bought extra things which made up for the weight difference, so as he demanded to know an explanation from the check-in clerk as to why, if it was the same luggage, it would weigh more, I innocently answered that it must have been the extra shoes and clothes. He was quiet and paid up. Later, he told me not to do that again, as he knew the reason why the luggage was heavier. He was just trying to get away with not paying. At that moment, a light bulb went off in my head. This man, who'd spent $1,500 on an exotic dancer for his friends, was making an already stressful job more stressful for the clerk in order to avoid paying $60. We broke up soon after, and I checked myself on the Karen tendencies that he had rubbed off on me. My ex-wife is a Karen in every sense but name. It was always so embarrassing. She was incapable of treating anyone like a human for the most trivial of occurrences. It was hell for me as a person that's pretty forgiving and doesn't seek out confrontation. So in one word, it was hell. Also, she's very codependent and jumps from relationship to relationship these days. I'm not surprised. My life has been a living heck. The number of times I've had to intervene to save the life of a customer service rep over nickels is insane. I've asked for a divorce now, just a couple of weeks ago. Guess how that went over? Stay strong, lawyer up, bury gold in a place where only you know where it is. Prepare for war. But good on you. Bury your gold in 4 different locations around Pawnee. My mum is a Karen. Not fun. I think she was part of the reason the girl I loved left, because whenever she was around, my mum behaved much better and put on a nice face. We argued frequently about my relationship with my mum. Hurts a lot. Don't think that I can fully let this one go. Look, I love my mum very much, and she's generally a very nice person. I've spent a good while trying to put it to words accurately, but it's difficult. Everything is very minor and very subtle, but it's constant all the time. It's not what she does, it's how she does it sort of thing. She doesn't try to hide her behavior when in public, she just tries to put her best face forward when around others like everyone else does. I don't know if she's aware of what she does when at home because it's so minor and subtle, but I have a difficult time believing that since it's constant and other reasons. For those concerned for me in some way, thank you, it means a lot. Only one of my friends knows the specifics of my relationship with my mum, so it's nice to receive support. To relieve some of your worries, she doesn't control my life or my actions. The pain she causes is dwarfed greatly by everything she has done for me. Without her, I wouldn't have made it to where I am today, and I'm extremely thankful and lucky to have her in my life despite the pain. I don't think I'll cut her out of my life. Less frequent contact helps, but she's not so great a terror that no contact is ever needed. I look forward to seeing her spoil my grandchildren, and I know she'll trust me to raise them and not try to take over and do it herself. I divorced an awful Karen who was convicted of domestic violence. That's a misdemeanor, folks. She got half of everything. Totally worth it. My life before was a nightmare, and escape was priceless. I got engaged to one. She was raised as a princess by her military father. However, she's super down to earth, but God forbid you work in the service industry and mess something up. She's worked at IHOP during college, so it humbled her compared to the rest of her family. She just writes reviews now, good or bad, and emails corporate to complain. If something is wrong with my food, she refuses me to sit there and eat it. Which I hate, but I have gotten her better about it, I believe. So maybe she's just a recovering Karen at this point? My mother is a Karen. If something minor inconveniences her, she blows it up into a huge deal, constantly complains, belittles me, and has a slight superiority complex. Oh my god, I read the title as Koreans, and I was thoroughly confused and amused by these stories. I'll see myself out. I'm not married to a Karen, but someone in my family decided to get hitched to one, and let me say, it's frickin' hell. I don't go to any social event if Karen will be there. It keeps the peace in my family, to be honest. Nor do I go alone with Karen. She's a nightmare to everyone in her path, from car guards to cashiers, even her friends. No one can be better than her or smarter than her, and she's just frickin' exhausting. The worst part is, her kids are becoming just like her. People who are married to Karens are the guy equivalent of Karens, or they're aloof goofs unaware that their Karen is a Karen. You won't get a real answer from them. Well, there's an awful lot of fiction going on here then, although I guess the majority of the stories are from family rather than spouses, so maybe your Ken theory holds some water. Was married to a male Karen, everything, and I mean everything, could set him off. We were at a local tap room and his iPhone automatically connected to the Wi-Fi. Keep in mind he had full bars on our cell service. The Wi-Fi was being wonky and wasn't working. The manager, super nice guy, comes over and asks how we're doing while he washes some glasses in the dish pit on the other side of the bar. The following conversation ensues. Keep in mind my husband is super irritated at this made-up problem because our cell service is working just fine and he could just turn off the Wi-Fi. Your Wi-Fi is frickin' trash. Yeah, sorry, we recently upgraded our internet and they're sending us a new modem. It's supposed to be here this week. If you say you have Wi-Fi, you should make sure it actually works. I know, I'm sorry. I'd be happy to restart the modem to see if that helps. My husband then ignores him and continues to talk under his breath about a made-up issue. This was my life for almost 5 years. The sense of entitlement was frustrating enough in public, but more so at home. I'd apologized to more servers, retail workers, neighbors, and random people in public for him in 5 years than the rest of my life outside of him. You know what? Now that I'm talking about it, maybe he's not so much a male Karen, he's more like a, piece of crap. Not married to one, but my mum is a Karen whose name actually is Karen. Simply put, I haven't seen her in over a year because I couldn't take it anymore. Living with her was just an exhausting nightmare. Karen's world revolves around Karen. Nobody else's issues matter. If you tell her that you had a bad day, she'll give you 20 reasons why her day was worse. You worked 60 hours this week? Well, when she was your age, she'd work 80. You were in the hospital after having major surgery? She has a pinched nerve in her arm, which is somehow worse. Oh, your boyfriend cheated on you? She couldn't even begin to tell you about all the heartbreak she's experienced in her life. She complains left and right about everything and anything. If you're taking a week break after just getting back from college, she'll ask why you haven't gotten a job yet and claim that you're lazy. If you go out to eat at a restaurant, the food is always too cold or too hot or too salty. You can only ever go to the places she wants to go because everything else is garbage. My entire graduation dinner, she complained about how cold the food was. She thrives in getting attention and constantly seeks it, but she has very few actual friends. Facebook is her lifeblood and she's always looking to start something on there. She's the queen of sharing uninformed, misguided, conservative propaganda, which always starts fights in her comments. Also, if a tragedy happens in the family, like the passing of my teenage cousin, she'll make a big scene on Facebook and expect condolences from anyone and everyone, and makes notes of the people who don't give her what she wants. And don't get me started with the blatant racism. I've heard everything from, watch out for the black people on the subway, they'll try to take your purse, to, it should be illegal for those Muslims to cover their faces. You should be able to see someone's face. One of my best friends is black, and she once told me, he's one of the good ones, they should all be like him. And minor, but the house always has to be spotless. You have a shirt on your bedroom floor? Pick it up. You kids are all slobs. We have people coming over. No, we don't, and even if we do, why would they be in my bedroom? Her house is her house, and she'll let you know. Any object she spent money on doesn't belong to you, it belongs to her. She also spends way too much money on home decor like oriental rugs, furniture, and then complains about how she has no money. In short, my mother is a Karen who's actually named Karen. Living with her is a nightmare.
Art teachers of Reddit, what's your draw anything you want story? Not my story, but seems to fit here. When I was in school to certify to become a teacher, we had a former principal as a professor for one of our courses who was trying to illustrate how difficult it could be to manage parent complaints and how to approach those situations with administration. His example was how he had been called into a conference once with an angry mom and the elementary school art teacher. The mom was furious because the teacher had asked the children to close their eyes and draw whatever came into their imagination. His assumption was that a student had drawn something inappropriate. Nope. The mom was mad because summoning an image in one's mind was, quote, witchcraft. So, little Timmy, what did you draw in class today?
I drew a rainbow.
It's not drawing, but I gave my high school kids a poetry assignment. They could write about anything that was school appropriate and have one curse word that wasn't a slur or the F-bomb. It had to include so much figurative language and whatnot. Girl turns in, quote, Mrs. My name is a bee. A poem about how she's tired of writing poems and that she's annoyed with me for assigning so many. Includes our requirements. I gave her a 96, a few errors, and the next poem she writes is, quote, Mrs. My name is a cool bee. About how she was sorry she was mean. I just remembered a poor little guy who drew a self-portrait. He drew with meticulous detail, and when it came down to drawing his pants, he drew the zippers so carefully, but it looked like a member. I was flummoxed about how to tell him that people might see something there that he didn't intend. My brother was told to draw an animal from any angle he wanted, so he drew a dot and said it was a very far away lion. I was substitute teaching an art class. An 8th grader drew a picture of an adult woman touching a child. I pulled the student aside after class and found out her aunt had been touching her for years when she was babysat or came to visit. I reported it, and her aunt ended up going to prison. Kids will sometimes draw things that they normally wouldn't say out loud. In early middle school, we did a project where we used cardboard draped in colorful paper mache to make a sound word, like wham or crinkle. I was really into knights at the time, so I made the word that was the sound of someone unsheathing a sword. That word was schlong. I got in trouble once for drawing a pooping butt. Little did my teacher know, but the drawing was actually a poorly drawn butterfly that ended up looking like a hairy pooping butt. And when asked why I put the details I did, like the legs, an antenna, and proboscidea coming off the segmented body, I said, I don't know, don't they all look like that? I saw one at recess and thought it was pretty and wanted to draw it. Thinking of the butterfly, of course. Nope, I ended up having to go see the school counselor. High school 1977. Not a teacher. While everyone else was drawing Pink Floyd rainbows and peace signs all over everything, the biggest burnout in the class made a wide metal bracelet with intricate triangular designs cut out of it. He turned it in and got a great grade for the first project he ever bothered finishing and some well-deserved praise for his effort. Teacher handed our work back, and first thing he did was grab a pair of pliers and bent all the triangles outward, making it a thick metal spiked bracelet. I found that devilishly, disturbingly clever. As a kid who was told to do a drawing that was going to be put on a plate, drew my cat doing a poo. I was asked multiple times if I wanted to redo it. I declined the offer. So, most of my life, I ate off a plate with my cat on it doing a poo as it was my plate, and still do. My siblings had similar plates with a car and a rocket ship. Mine is clearly much better. Was around 5 or 6 at the time, and totally worth it. Still had the plate. I have a quote, design your own monster Halloween lesson. Most kids draw cute ghosts or cool vampires. One 7th grader drew a sad clown hanging by a belt from a ceiling fan. He had issues. I ran arts and crafts classes at a youth group for disadvantaged kids. Decided one day to give them total freedom. I just put out all the supplies we had and let them go crazy. Kids made some really cool works of art, all very colorful and creative. I was talking to one kid when another asked me to help him spell things for his artwork. I go over to his table with him, and he's been making a card for a boy in his class at school. He tells me his friend's mom had just died from cancer, and he wanted to make a card for him to cheer him up, but he couldn't spell anything he wanted to write. He was 13 years old, and I had to help him spell out something like, "Dear blank, I am so sorry about your mom, but I will always be your friend and here for you. Love, blank." I had to help him spell his own name. He made the card totally unprompted. I feel for the guy. He was totally sweet and caring for his friend and really smart. He just not got the help he needed. Went home after and had a little sob. Edit. Hey guys, thanks for the rewards. I really appreciate all the lovely things you've been saying. I'd just like to say that I really didn't do anything special here. I only helped him spell out a card. I wish I could have done more, but I was fresh out of high school and was only volunteering. I actually had been in one of the other youth groups they ran and been asked to volunteer in this one as they needed more hands. I left shortly after this for university. I reported the incident to my supervisor, and she assured me he was getting the care and help he needed, but they could not tell me more for security reasons. He was the real hero here. I hope he and his friend are doing okay. Thanks again. One kid had to have a meeting with the principal, her parents, and the art teacher because the art teacher decided that because this second grade girl only drew people without hands, the little girl felt powerless. All these adults question this child about the meaning of her drawings. She tells them, hands are too hard to draw. Sometimes, only children can understand adult problems. And this is one of them. Why do we have so many fingers? Former student here. We were supposed to do a bit of abstract artwork for a course assignment. My work was a framed square cutout from an old t-shirt I had previously used to help restain an old table. Not only did I get an A on the assignment, but I entered it into a silent auction later that semester and someone bought it. When I was in the 7th grade, our art teacher had us do whatever we wanted to be entered in the school art fair. I was really lazy and just decided to use every color of pastel that was available to draw a rainbow of sorts on a piece of construction paper. Then, I tore it all into pieces and glued them all together again randomly. I called the piece Life and argued that it was supposed to represent the chaos and uncertainty that is life. It ended up winning first place in my grades part of the art fair, and I ended up getting a cool art set, but really it was just me being lazy and feeding some BS about a deeper meaning. Reminder from your friendly neighborhood Reddit narrator that it's always a good idea to subscribe and like the video. Hit the bell to turn on notifications, and remember to subscribe to Am I the Jerk too, linked in the description below. As always, thanks for watching. Parent here, not an art teacher. In kindergarten, my son came home with a packet of finished assignments he got back from the teacher. One was a paper having them draw a body part with the prompt, "Here are my." Example given was feet. What did my kid draw? Butt cheeks. Drawing of the back of a person with two giant, well drawn I might add, cheeks. My husband and I laughed our own butt cheeks off when we saw it. We kept the paper, for posteriority. Student here, my art teacher was somewhat crazy. She let us draw anything we want, and to get 100%, all you had to do was tell her it, quote, had a deep connection to the earth or some other nonsense. I drew a jellyfish and told her it represented wisdom because it was immortal. When I was in 2nd grade, our teacher told us to doodle on the back of a quiz if we finished early. I decided to draw a house high in the sky with a long staircase leading to it. To emphasize its height, I drew clouds, but it needed more. I decided to add in an airplane. Later, my teacher called me to her desk, and I got in trouble because the plane looked like it was heading towards the house, and this was right after 9/11 happened. Still have no idea what I was thinking. When I was in high school, part of the final exam/assessments in art class involved picking an object of your choice based on a written passage and painting it as best as you can. My art teacher told us about one kid who chose a book as his object. He turned up with an art book with a professional still life painting on the cover and proceeded to recreate the painting stroke by stroke. If I recall correctly, there were phone calls made to his parents and to the Board of Education over it, but the kid got away with it in the end. I assume there were some changes to the rules after that. Edit. Since this is now my top comment, here's a bonus story about the same assessment. When the time for my own assessment came around, the object I chose to paint from the written passage was a skull. The next day, the teacher made his way around the class, asking students individually about their chosen objects. The art teacher was quite elderly, and he was quite a reserved and somewhat mysterious fellow. He had also taken a shine to me as I was pretty good at art and more enthusiastic than the others. He makes his way around to me and I tell him I want to paint a skull. "And where do you plan on finding one?" he asks. I told him I had seen one of those plastic replica skeletons in the biology lab and I was going to ask about borrowing the skull. He blew off that idea as if it were complete nonsense. He paused for a moment and then said a little more quietly, "I can get you a skull." Okay, I replied, not knowing what he was getting at really. The guy goes off into his little storeroom, rummages for a couple minutes, and comes back with a real human skull in his hand. I politely asked him how he came by a real human skull. He turned his gaze away pensively and said, "An old friend gave it to me," and left it at that. Not a teacher, but when I was in 7th grade, I drew a picture in my art class sketchbook of Barney and Elmo smoking pot and drinking booze, drawn with colored pencils and all. I showed it to my friends, and they thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. The art teacher, however, was not pleased and sent me to the principal's office. The principal then looked through my sketchbook and ripped out all the drawings she deemed as inappropriate. It shattered my soul that day, and I cried for some time afterwards. In fact, I think that's what ended my dream of becoming an artist. Screw you, Mrs. Moreno and Mrs. McKeon, for robbing me of a better future. When I was around 8 or 9, I got into drawing cars, and simultaneously into drawing tribal decorations. Probably not PC, but, you know, the type a lot of people get as a tattoo. So, I drew a car with a tribal decal, and because of the hook-like shapes in the tribal decal, I, inappropriately, named the car, quote, "The Hooker." When she was done laughing, my mom took the time to explain the world's oldest profession. Whenever I got to draw something on my own, I just drew cake. I rarely let them draw whatever because they inevitably would draw predictable cliches. 8th grade boys would draw knives with blood dripping, or an eye, and girls a unicorn. Trying to get them to draw from life was tough. Not an art teacher, but for 1 year I was a preschool teacher a few years back. It was like a Friday at 4 p.m. in the winter. I gave the kids some time to color or draw whatever they wanted. 10 minutes go by, and one of my students, 4 at the time, who I had a love-hate relationship with because he caused a lot of behaviors but could be a sweet kid when he wanted to, came up to me and said, "Look, Mrs. Blank, I made a drawing for you." I gave a warm smile and asked him to show it to me. It was a drawing of his parents doing the nasty. He even got the shaft part right with balls and everything. Totally shocked but remained as neutral as possible because I knew if I reacted in a major way, he would have continued to make more drawings like this. This is something I learned about him. So I said, "Let's put that in your backpack and we can show mommy when she picks you up." Dad comes that day. More embarrassing for me. I told him about the drawing and he turned bright red, explaining the other night he had walked in on them screwing. We awkwardly laughed about it, and that was that. In 9th grade, as an end-of-the-year project, we could basically draw whatever we wanted, and we had a week to do it. Me, being the little car nerd I am, drew the entire drivetrain and suspension of a Chevy K5 Blazer. I'm a teacher, but I don't teach art. I was teaching a class of 7-year-olds who are usually a blessing, but there's just one kid who has some real problems. He can't speak English at all. Even after me spending a year trying to teach him and all his classmates progressing well, he just refuses to engage with any teacher and is extremely disruptive, often crying and screaming. I think he has special needs, but that's not handled well in China. Anyway, after battling with him to no avail, assigning him, quote, class police roles, everything, I just gave up this one day and gave him some paper to draw on whilst the rest of the kids learn without him distracting them. He drew a picture of me with a large pee-pee and lots of knives in me with blood and wrote my name in perfect English. It was eerie, but I just felt sad and concerned what had happened to this boy. The school gave him no support, and I only saw him for about an hour a week. I left the school shortly after, unrelated, and wonder how he is now. I'm an art teacher, but this story is about my substitute teacher. I asked my students what they had been drawing when I was gone. The class was absolutely silent, apart from some boys that were giggling. They were 13 years old. I asked what was so funny, and they said the substitute was great. At the same time, the girls seemed as they wanted to disappear from the classroom. So I asked why the teacher was great, and the boys just exploded. "He told us to draw flying cock-a-doodle-doo." Well, I don't have to say more than that substitute teacher never came to our school again. In junior high, my art teacher pulled me aside to tell me that she was really impressed because I could draw better than her. After that, she pretty much let me have free reign. as long as what I was drawing worked towards the lesson goal, such as shading, perspective, etc. For the end-of-year project, I did a Robotech Veritech fighter in stipple, drawn only using dots. The next year, when I would have had her again for art, she paid out of pocket for me to take an art course at the community college across the street. She was an absolutely amazing teacher. Not a teacher, but in middle school, we got an assignment in art class to draw a still life of fruit. I thought the idea was totally boring and decided to put a creative spin on it. I drew a bunch of different fruits all sitting in the seats of a coliseum watching an apple kill an orange in the center ring. I failed the assignment, and my teacher even pulled me out into the hallway to tell me directly that she didn't like me or the work that I produced. Didn't let that crush my dream though, and I kept making my assignments weirder and weirder to tick her off. Reminds me of that time I got suspended in kindergarten for drawing a crappy stick figure gun. I tried to save myself that day by saying it was a water gun, since it was so crappy you couldn't tell the difference. But they weren't having it, and little Plava27 went home that day. Not an art teacher, but when I was in late elementary/early junior high, my art teacher at the time gave us free rein. I had just learned what furries and pokemorphs were at the time. My art teacher, thankfully, just thought I couldn't draw werewolves for crap. When I was in high school, I was trying to learn how to draw perspective for the first time, and I was doodling a wolf howling, mostly because I enjoy wolves, and there's plenty of references online that I could check my work against. However, a seated howling wolf, when viewed from the front, doesn't show eyes or ears or most of the face, just an upturned muzzle and chin. I was actually kind of glad at this at first, because I sucked at positioning wolf eyes properly. I could draw pretty eyes, and I could draw heads a little, but put the two together, and it all looked wrong. So anyway, I'm drawing this wolf, and I think I'm doing a fine job of it, and I've got the muzzle and a bit of nose and the cheeks and the neck and the chest and all that, and everything looked fine. I was actually kind of proud of it. At least, I was until I got home several hours later and pulled it out again to work on it. You see, what confronted me at the end of the day was not my howling wolf, but what looked remarkably like a fuzzy, vaguely cone-shaped shaft with some kind of diseased black tip, all perched atop 4 paws and a tail. I've never drawn a howling wolf from that perspective again. In 7th grade, we were supposed to draw a fish made out of smaller fish. A few days earlier, I had learned that seahorses are fish, and I was obsessed with this small tidbit of knowledge and made a seahorse out of small fish. I got into a discussion with my teacher about whether I did the assignment correctly or not. 30 minutes and a Google search later, I got a C, which, fair, I wasn't the best painter. Not an art teacher, but my daughter in 1st grade was given an assignment to write a story and draw. She wrote and drew a story about Horny the Rhino. It amazes me how you can have names for animals that describe their appearances, like Fluffy the cat, Scaly the lizard, or the blue-footed booby. Shoutouts to ornithologists for giving birds the best names. But as soon as you try and name a horned animal, you gotta get a little more creative, otherwise you end up like this 1st grader. When I was in the 1st grade, they had everyone in every grade draw something. It could be anything. I drew an evil snail that had gotten snatched up by a bird, and I had a voice bubble that said, "I will be back," or something like that, coming from this evil snail. In the foreground, I drew my family. That was it. That was the whole picture. Flash forward to like 6 months, and my really bad drawing was chosen as number 1 in the 1st grade. Then, the school had an assembly where they showed the top drawings from each grade. So, I go up to the front with the other winners, and the principal goes through each one and says a little something about it. Eventually, they get to my drawing, and I quickly realized why I was chosen. They thought the bird was a plane, and the evil snail was my dad leaving to deploy. Important note is that this school was on a military base. My dad had never been deployed and was in fact depicted on the ground with the rest of my family. But I just stood there and accepted the award, and I never told another living soul because I was so embarrassed and guilty. I can honestly say I was one of the better artists at my school, asked to draw for the paper, design t-shirts, mugs, etc., and voted outstanding senior in art. I taught calligraphy, and one of my logos became the state logo for the state science division. I'm also somewhat of a jerkwad. We were assigned an exercise to draw our offhand, left if you're right-handed, right if you're left-handed. I asked the teacher, "How far would you like us to draw to?" Her response, "Well, you can draw all the way up to your elbow or cut it off at the wrist. Your choice." So, I drew it cut it off at the wrist. with exposed bone, tissue, and pooling blood. She was real careful with her instructions after that. I was an art teacher for 4 years, and I have so many stories. So many stories. One that comes to mind is a drawing this strange little child who was oddly obsessed with me made me as a gift. Now, for context, my personal aesthetic is what my friends affectionately call, quote, adult tomboy goth, which is to say I wear all black, somewhat androgynous clothing, and have a penchant for the dark and absurd. Of course, in work environments, I dress more professionally, but my kids all knew I was a dark-humored little oddball and they loved me for it. So, this girl is doing free draw, and every time I walk over, she covers up the paper with her arm and hisses at me like a cat, as she was wont to do. After about an hour, she scurries over to me with this huge grin on her face and announces, Bobby Yagatron, Bobby Yagatron, I made you a thing! And my lord, oh boy, it was the best gift I have ever received from a child. The drawing was of a skeleton beckoning a crying girl with no eyes into a pre-dug grave. The gravesite was elaborately mapped out with the whole underground portion where the coffin would be, a tombstone, and little flowers around the tombstone. I laminated it, and to this day it is still on my bedroom door, even after 3 moves around the country. I miss teaching. To the doctors of Reddit, what is it like when you have a doctor's appointment? I avoid disclosing I'm a doctor unless specifically asked what I do for work. I think I'm better taken care of when the doc/team is most comfortable and working in their routine. Difficult and demanding patients who request special treatment often have worse outcomes. I don't want to be one of them. I completely agree. I never tell them I'm a doctor. Same thing when I take my kids to a pediatrician. I just want to be treated like a regular patient. Only exception was when I broke my hand and needed it operated on ASAP, not 10 days later. Being an ER resident, I always wonder which one of my co-residents is working in the emergency department as I drive home from a shift, knowing if something were to happen, they would be checking my rectal tone in front of all my coworkers. And then I think about how big their hands are. With my mom, it was like this. Mom, I think I have basal cell carcinoma on my back, but I can't see it quite clearly. Derm, you do have basal cell carcinoma. Good job. Went to student health as a med student. Attending I worked with the week before does my PAP. With the resident, he asked, I said yes. Kept quizzing me. What am I looking for? What does it mean if the PAP is positive? Etc. I'm getting questions right, but he's being real weird about it. Realized in parking lot after appointment, he was asking the resident, not me. Rotate with said resident a few months later. Bad. Because I can see all the shortcuts they're taking and I'm aware of the examination they should be doing but aren't. Edit. I should clarify, because I'm afraid it might have given the wrong impression. Most physicians I've met seem to know what they're about, but it's easy to spot areas where you would have done something differently, and the negative examples always stick out more than the positive. The example I was thinking of was this. I didn't learn I had scoliosis until my first week of medical school. It's mild, as scoliosis goes, but I have back and/or neck pain every day. So, I went to a local MD to get checked out and see if I should be worried. I wait for 2 hours to get in. Said MD takes a cursory history, doesn't ask any of the right questions, family history of this condition, when did it start, has it worsened, etc., and in the physical exam, barely touches my back. I knew the tests they needed to do and the questions she should have asked because I was in medical school. I was there for her experience and advice. I got neither. A better doctor, or more realistically, one with more time to see patients, would have said, hey, I don't know anything about scoliosis. You need to see someone who does. Or hey, actually knowing how to deal with a reasonably common condition would have been nice, I suppose, but I don't know, I'm a lowly resident. Edit 2. Whoa, never had this many notifications before. To answer a few questions, number 1, this does not qualify as professional medical advice. If you have a medical problem, you should go see your doctor in the meat space. If you do have scoliosis, I would look around for a doctor who A, is an MD/DO with an orthopedics background, whether as an actual orthopod or sports med, or B, is a practicing DO, you'll have to Google it, who does OMT and is familiar with scoliosis. Just my 2 cents. Opinions on chiropractors vary wildly in the medical community, and I won't get into that here because frankly, I'm not informed enough to comment. Number 2. Several people have asked how this uppity med student knew anything in his first week of med school. Fair question. I was told I had scoliosis in the first week of med school. It was 6 months to a year before I got it checked out. Never had time to do anything those first 2 years, especially not go to the doctor. Number 3. As others have pointed out, never be afraid to seek a second opinion. Doctors are human, and even hyper-educated humans make mistakes. Not only that, but frequently, diseases don't present the same way in the same patient every day of the year. Things can be messy in the real world. Complicated diagnoses may take time and may have to work through alternative diagnoses to get to the truth. Male gynecologist here. When I have a patient come in for a PAP, it is always a bit annoying when they leave their underwear on under the gown. I have to step out of the room and wait for them to remove it. When I went in for my first physical in years, I stripped naked under the paper gown. Apparently, guys don't do this. They leave their underwear on. Who knew? My family doc, who is also my best friend, had a good laugh at my expense over this breach in etiquette. He also texted me the night before to let me know he was putting the KY in the fridge for my exam. Not a doctor, but was a medical assistant in an OBGYN practice for a while. We were near a very large medical center, so would regularly get physician patients. My favorite was this physician couple who would come in for pregnancy check-ins and refuse to let me take the woman's blood pressure. The husband would bring his own stethoscope and BP cuff, and they would sit down into this weird, intimate BP taking ritual that took forever while I just kind of stood off to the side. I told the doc I was working with about it, and she's like, "It's okay. I know them. They're like that. I'll take it again when I see her." So weird. It truly depends on the way you act. Most of the time, I won't tell the doctor that I'm also a doctor unless specifically asked about it or if there is a slip of my tongue about symptoms or any other medical words. Some doctors tend to be not too specific when they know you're a doctor because, quote, you already know what's happening. Sometimes, even my wife gets the ask your husband to clarify your questions. I try to have an open mind when I'm the patient because we are trained to think the worst, so there is a lot of cancer in my mind. Currently, I work in a palliative care unit. I have had medical patients and carers, and I would say that it is truly diverse how they react. We are also human and we are sick and vulnerable. The doctor vein can go completely off or go on overdrive. Turning it off is better and less intrusive most of the time. The test results came in. It's bad news. You're not subscribed to Am I the Genius or Am I the Jerk, linked in the description below. And you haven't liked the video either. But it's not too late to turn your life around. Please, subscribe. It's for the better. Just kidding. Thanks for watching. Not a doctor, but whenever my dad, who is a doctor, took me in for an appointment when I was a kid, it was always super awkward because if anything was done even remotely incorrectly, he'd basically do the medical equivalent of the "let me speak to your manager" routine. Which I kind of understand in that context, since it's your kid's health you're talking about and not a freaking expired coupon, but still, made me want to melt through the floor. In my experience, doctors tend to be pretty decent patients when admitted to the hospital. They know the routine, they get to know the nurses, they try not to hassle anyone, they can speak to their own doctors as colleagues, etc. Nurses, on the other hand, feel it is very important for you to know at all times and in every sentence that they are nurses, and they are much better at nursing than you. I will say there was this one instance of a doctor/patient and a hospitalist getting into an argument that was pretty interesting. Basically, doctor/patient disagreed with what the hospitalist was doing and asked if hospitalist had read any of the recent studies which suggested that he, instead, follow a different protocol. Hospitalist was not down with the quote, "let's talk as colleagues," and decided to go full on, "screw you, I'm the only one wearing pants in the room right now." There was a mild argument, but remained incredibly civil. 2 days later, the hospitalist was fired. Doctor/patient's brother, or some other close relation, was the CEO. Nurses tend to thrash. Doctors go for surgically precise cuts. One time, I got a page about a patient who was still having some pain that wasn't relieved with the Tylenol she had specifically requested earlier. So, I ordered Toradol/Ketorolac. For those unfamiliar, Toradol is an NSAID, i.e., the same drug class as Advil/ibuprofen and Aleve/naproxen. The only difference is that it is not available over the counter and it can be administered both orally and parenterally, IV/injection. I get another page like 15 minutes later from the charge nurse about how this patient refused the Toradol because she is a nurse and does not want to be given any, quote, narcotic pain medication. I explained the situation to the charge nurse over the phone and got the feeling that the patient was under the impression that she was being given tramadol, which technically is an opioid, but not one of the good ones by any stretch. A discussion ensued, and despite very clearly explaining what I just wrote about Toradol in both lay and medical language, this nurse just insisted that she was right and vaguely insinuated I was trying to turn her into an addict. Her argument basically devolved into her shouting, "I've been a nurse longer than you've been a doctor, and I know what I'm talking about." I tend to give an honest effort to educate patients, but at some point, you just have to pick your battles. So, she got some naproxen, and I made it clear to the nursing staff that unless things significantly changed, either with her condition or her attitude, I did not want to get any more calls if she was still complaining of pain when the naproxen didn't work as well as she wanted it to. I'm a nurse, and I don't like announcing it when I am being treated medically. My OB knows what I do because I work with her. Sometimes they figure me out if I let some jargon slip. I don't bring it up because I'm an OB nurse, and generally, I have little knowledge about other specialties. I don't want them to leave information out because they assume I know. I also don't want them to feel like I am judging them and the care they give me, and have them act weird around me as a result. I have a doctorate. I visit the medical doctor very infrequently, but after a little initial confusion, my GP once remarked, "Oh, you're a real doctor." Med student. Had to go to the ED and then surgery for appendicitis. Got pimped by the surgeon. Felt bad, man. Edit. Getting pimped as a medical student is when you get grilled by your attending about facts about medicine that often are minutia they only know. Sometimes facts not even relevant to medicine. Even more often, the questions are, quote, read my mind type of questions. Your embarrassment and fear is what causes you to remember these facts, so they're used as a, quote, teaching tool. As a nurse, I could tell precisely which topics individual baby surgeons were traumatized by based on which BS orders and details they obsess over, and I curse whatever attending did that to them every time it becomes my problem. Speaking from both perspectives as a younger primary care physician. As a patient, my appointments are 50% what I'm there for and usually very direct, e.g., I have a sinus infection. It is now thick yellow-green discharge with fevers and present over 10 days. I think I may now need antibiotics. He will take a quick peek, then just give me a script. Then 50% non-related conversation regarding how my practice is going, learning a thing or two about a new specialist practice or tips and tricks of the trade. My doc is a very chill, well-versed, and quite an experienced physician who always teaches me a thing or two. As a physician, I also have multiple physicians as patients. My experience varies by specialty. Family physicians' patients seem more chill and relaxed, and usually drop by with a cup of coffee. Pediatricians who are patients are really fun to be around, but some of them seem to have underlying anxiety and at times fairly demanding. Internists are just so intimidating as patients, especially when older and more experienced, but always teach me a thing or two and force me to stay up to date on my guidelines. I also find specialist medical knowledge are more versed in their specialty. An ophthalmologist, as expected, won't know much about gynecology and PAPs, as their last PAP they did was in med school. Not a doctor, but as the husband of a nurse, it's horrid. My wife and the doctor/nurse practitioner will sit and bat ideas back and forth until they can get my wife to accept the diagnosis as her own idea. I'm a doctor. We make terrible patients because we tend to minimize or rationalize every warning sign. Going for a doctor's appointment basically reminds us that we can also get sick, and since we have the burden of knowledge, we're just hoping we don't find something that'll force a lifestyle change. Otherwise, most times it's been a pretty standard experience in terms of registering, waiting, and being seen for 15 minutes. If you go to someone you know personally, which I actually recommend against, you might get some preferential treatment, but it's mostly the same. Other way around, I'm a nurse and was taking care of a doctor I work with. Awkward. She asked me if she could give a urine sample, and she wasn't in for something I'd usually get one for, but then she made me nervous because she should know that. So I was like, "You're the doctor, you tell me." And she said, "Nope, you're the one calling the shots now." And I was like, "Okay, well, I think we are good with that one then." It was pretty awkward all around, but I work labor and delivery, so we deliver a lot of our own nurses and doctors, which is strange, but also nice. Today I learned that doctors go see other doctors. I thought they healed themselves naturally, like glowy mist thingies oozing out of their bodies and raising up into the air. But I have heard of barbers going to other barbers. My PCP doesn't know I'm a physician. When he asked, I lied about my profession. Not a doctor, but trained first aider for 20 plus years now. Step 1. The precursor. I'd been going blind for months. Not just a little, but my vision, which was corrected to 20/20 normally, was now utter crap even with my glasses on, to the point where I couldn't read text on a monitor. Docs can't figure out what's going on, so I worry for weeks, test after test. Step 2. The night. This was the night I figured out what was wrong with me. I was suddenly nothing but thirsty and peeing. Like, get up every hour and stagger to the back room to empty a full bladder and then chug a quart of water thirsty and peeing. And when I get up in the morning, I realize I need medical attention because I was apparently a diabetic. I then chugged a 2-liter of Dr. Pepper because hyperglycemia is a lot less lethal in the short term than hypoglycemia. Didn't know if I'd already pushed past the butt end of hyperglycemia, but my first aid training was in the right place. Step 3. The exam. Go into the triage. Nurse takes my BP and vitals. Observes that I'm obviously not 100% there mentally. Docs get an IV in me, and as it flushes, they draw blood as well. I share that I think I'm diabetic, and the AP and nurse both smile, ignore it, and spend 4 hours asking me about what drugs I'm on. Step 4. Smug face. I was diabetic. No apology from the doc, but my face was suitably smug every time he talked to me. Pretty great, really. Front of the line type stuff. Call my PCP friends or partner and say, hey, what are you doing for lunch? I've got a thing on me I want your opinion on. I'll buy you lunch. Or a radiologist. Hey man, my shoulder's been killing me. I lifted too much with it and now it's borked. Mind doing an MRI? Sure. What's lunch look like for you? Basically, I end up buying people lunches and they don't have to document anything. Win-win. I try not to flaunt my title, but it does have its advantages. Several years ago, I needed shoulder surgery. The morning of the surgery, the anesthesiologist and his nursing student came in. He asked if anyone had consented me for my nerve block. I said no, and his nurse started doing the prep work, draping my shoulder, cleaning, etc. The anesthesiologist starts to explain to me. What we are doing is called a stellate nerve block. Saying it very slowly, it's where we take a probe and we try to find the nerve that goes down your shoulder. Again, all being said very slowly so I can understand. And then we do, I'm sorry, I'm one of the radiology fellows here in the hospital. His whole demeanor relaxed, and he said at a normal pace, we're doing a stellate nerve block. He gently pulled the nursing student out of the way and finished the rest of the procedure himself. When I go to see a doctor, which is not often enough since I don't need no stinking doctor, it's nice to be able to cut to the chase and not have the minutia explained. However, I make it clear that I'm no longer on my playground, and it's their expertise that I'm paying for. I mostly sit there and try and convey what is wrong / what I need without telling the doctor. It's also hard not to just give them your history like you take a history and preempt their questions. Lay people don't announce, nothing runs in my family without being asked. I always feel it's a bit twatty to say, I'm a medical student / doctor at the start, but then it's awkward when they work it out and you haven't told them before. I also feel under pressure to understand or remember exactly what they're talking about and prove my knowledge too. My dad is a pharmacist, and the number of times I'd come out of an appointment with a certain prescription and he would call the doctor to tell them to change it is countless. Most of the time he was colleagues or had a 1 degree of separation kind of relationship with these doctors, so they didn't seem to mind, even though it was awkward for me personally. Typically, he knew of a better option or just wanted the generic, which would save him a bunch of money. I had one eye doctor who was mad though, so that was not fun. I am super polite, show up early, and yield to expertise that isn't specific to my specialty, radiology. I imagine that in some ways it's easier for my docs because they don't have to dumb anything down for me. I'm a nurse, and the worst thing for me is blood draws and IVs. At work, I'm the one they look for when there's a tough stick no one else can hit. I can tell in the first 30 seconds if the person knows what they're doing, but unless they're really hurting me, I try not to micromanage. Also, I have high blood pressure that runs 130/80 on a good day. If you let the air out of the cuff in 5 seconds and say it's 110/60, I don't trust you anymore. Not a doctor, but a medical lab scientist. My doctor knows what I do and sometimes jokes, you could run this yourself, right? Went to the ED and the RN asked if I was an MLS because she set the tubes she drew from my arm down without mixing them, and I immediately began to mix them. It's important to mix them, because certain ones are rejected if a clot forms. She was like, great, without sarcasm. Another ED visit, the nurse learned what I did and insulted my career. You just push buttons all day? No. The instrument can't tell between a blast and a mono. I do. I go to an office outside of my job because I don't want my employer to have access to my medical record. Not that I have anything significant in my medical history to hide, and not that my employer can legally access my file without my consent, but I still like it this way. I started seeing a nurse practitioner out of necessity of getting an appointment, and now I choose to see her. She's thorough, she listens, and we get along really well. She actually gave me her personal email in case I needed to get a hold of her for any reason. That's not something you do for patients, but she knows I get it, and I would never abuse that privilege. Fourth-year medical student. I tore my bicep, and before surgery, the anesthesiologist used an ultrasound to place a nerve block in my brachial plexus. This happens to be one of the biggest pain-in-the-butt bundles of nerves in the human body. It crisscrosses every which way and sends off branches which sometimes reconnect. I'm hopped up on benzos with a huge needle in my neck, and this dude is like, what are the nerve roots of this little guy? Pointing to some blurry line on the screen. Screw that guy.
Reddit, how have you made a rude person's day worse? Excuse the change in voice, I am currently getting over COVID. Today on the train, I sat next to a woman who was angry that I sat next to her because she wanted the 2 seats to herself. As I sat there, she kept mouthing under her breath how she just wanted to sit there alone, blah blah blah. Despite the fact I wanted to tell her that it was public transportation and she needed to get over it, I kept my mouth shut. A few minutes later, a large woman with a large purse comes and stands in the same car I was in. I get her attention and tell her that she could have my seat. She huffs and puffs her way to me, and I help her sit down while grinning at the angry woman who was upset I'd sat beside her. I enjoyed watching her head almost explode from anger as the other large woman's rolls and purse pressed against her for the rest of the ride. Anyone else have any of those subtle revenge stories? Edit, this lady is a regular and is a known seat hog. I've seen her get into arguments before with people because she wants 2 seats to herself. Everyone pays to ride the train, so if there's a seat open, then it's up for grabs. I was working as a manager in a big nightclub about a year ago. I don't wear a uniform, but have a radio and run the security team. The venue has a great smoking section that looks out onto the street. One night, the venue was packed, so I did my usual roam making sure that there were no problems. However, it was too packed to walk through the smoking section, so I walked down the street instead, but could still very easily see into the smoking section. One guy stares me down, then calls me over and starts swearing at me for no reason, and telling me that, quote, pieces of crap like you could never even get into a venue like this. He obviously had no idea I was the manager. However, I didn't want to have security get into a fight inside with him. The guy kept telling me he would punch me out and stuff, and was clearly trying to look macho to impress someone. So I agreed and told him to come and meet me outside, and he could even have a free swing. He puts his drink down, takes off his jacket, and storms outside. Once he walked outside, I walked back inside and told security not to let him back in. The look on his face when he realized I ran the place was priceless, and then the realization that he couldn't get back into the club was amazing. It was the easiest and most fun removal I have ever done. I'm a manager at a grocery store, so I get awesomely rude customers on a daily. Every Wednesday is senior discount day. You have to be 55 to 60 to qualify for the discount. Needless to say, Wednesdays are tense. Lots of seniors and lots of other people who don't want to deal with the seniors. I don't generally mind the old folks. Most of them are pretty cool and have some interesting stories and cute jokes. This Wednesday, there was one particular customer who was being a huge pain in the butt from the moment she walked in. She was tall, blonde, high heels, very made up, and dressed to the nines. She was probably late 30s to early 40s. She came storming up to customer service. There are no parking spots. This is ridiculous. I'm going to request to corporate that you expand your parking lot since you don't seem to have the initiative to request that yourself. Off to a great start, lady. She comes storming back up about 45 minutes later. I am in a huge hurry, and every line has someone in it. I need to check out here. We had 3 lines open, and each one had one single customer. One. I say, no problem, but I'll get you at a checkout. You have too many items to get here. She has a huge hissy fit. I don't have time for this. Let's go. As I'm checking her out, it is constant whining. You only have one brand of makeup? That is ridiculous. I only wear MAC, but I was going to settle for Revlon, but you don't even have that. Now I have to make a whole separate trip. Please don't put my bread on top of my eggs. The eggs could roll over and crush the bread. Please bag my avocados separately. I need to use those for a face mask tonight. They need to be perfect. I have a photo session for work tomorrow. I'm in a magazine. She was unbelievable. Finally, at the end, I had enough. As she's about to pay, I say, "Don't forget today is senior discount day. You get 5% off." She just stared at me. "What?" I smiled broadly. "Every Wednesday, senior citizens get 5% off their bill. I'll go ahead and take it off. You are 55 to 60, right?" She is staring at me, debit card in hand, cheeks getting red. I lose my smile slowly and say, "Oh, you don't qualify? Sorry about that. Maybe next year. Thanks for your honesty." I haven't seen her in the store since. I used to work for the DMV, and the one I worked at had pretty limited parking. Surprise! I had left for lunch, came back, and was having a hard time finding a place to park. I finally found a spot, so I drove up to it and put my signal on, showing that I was waiting for it. People, in my experience, usually respect this and continue on. Not this time. Just as the car was backing out, after I had waited a few minutes, a car came from the opposite side of the lot, made eye contact with me, and then shot right into the parking space. I was so mad because now I would be late after looking for a new spot. As I drove past the woman that had taken the spot, I just shook my head and she responded by shrugging her shoulders, smiling, mouthing the words, "Oh well," to me, and then ran her finger from her eye down her cheek as if to mock me crying about it. I continued into work, got in trouble for being late, but had actually forgotten about the incident until whose number gets called to my station but Miss Spot Stealer herself. The look on her face was priceless. Keep in mind that I'm not your average DMV worker. I understand that stuff happens and waive penalties all the time and treat my customers with respect because I believe that what goes around comes around, and I know how crappy it is to wait at the DMV all day. I'm usually so nice about getting penalties taken off people's accounts that I get in trouble for it at times. So, I greet Spot Stealer as nice as I would anyone else. In fact, it may have been nicer than it normally would be. She may have thought I didn't recognize her. Her registration is far past due, with hundreds due in penalties. I let her tell me her whole sob story and then finally tell her that she owes in full because she was aware of her due date. She argues it a little until, out of sight from my manager, I mouth the words, "Oh well," and drag my finger from my eye to my cheek, mocking her tears. At point, she puts her head down and proceeds to take out her card and pay the full amount. Because yes, we do take debit cards. What goes around, comes around. When I was working a crappy job in my younger days, a customer was upset that he had to wait in line like everyone else before being able to make his purchase. He actually said, "Do you know who I am? I own hotels." To which I replied, "Well, sir, I'm sorry, but this isn't Monopoly. This is Krispy Kreme." He was not pleased. Not even COVID can keep me from telling you to subscribe to Am I the Genius and Am I the Jerk, linked in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, and I promise I'll sound a lot better next time. I was sitting in my car taking some photos with my new smartphone while using different settings. Then there was this woman who had just stopped at a one-way street with only one lane. So she stands there for like 10 seconds doing nothing, and I thought this is very unusual. So I started to make a video. Another driver comes and honks. She then starts to reverse and hit the car of the other guy with their big BMW. 4 guys jumped out of the BMW and start yelling at the guy. You have to know in Germany, always the one who hits another car from behind will be blamed if he can't prove that it wasn't his fault. So we have a classic case of insurance fraud. The poor guy at the back was really worried because he knew he couldn't prove it. I just sit there in my car and waited for the police. Then I go outside and the police started to get the stories. Of course, there was 4 against 1. I just stood there and listened to the woman complaining about who this idiot hits her from behind and her brand new car is now damaged. After the police took the statement from both sides and even take my statement, they said there was no chance that 2 versus 4 could prove that he didn't do it. 2 of the guys at the BMW said they didn't know the girl and were pedestrians who saw it. That would increase the credibility. So they made all false statements to the police, and exactly that's the thing I wanted to happen. I then told the police, "Oh wait, there's just one thing," like Columbo style, and said that I have a video of what happened. I showed them to the police, and the women and the drivers just stand there with mouth open. You could not only see how she hits his car, but also that the quote, pedestrians were with the women in the car. The guy then hugs me, and we became good friends. Turns out he lives near me, and we spend the evening drinking and gaming. I'm in a massive line at a store. I'm next in line, but the person in front of me has a crap load of stuff. A helpful clerk sees the mess and opens another aisle saying, "I can help the next customer." Well, that's me. However, the checkout counter has two sides, a right and a left. It is set up for people to come to the right side, but the left can be used as well. As I am stepping over to her counter, this jerkwad from the very end of my line is sprinting to her counter, pushing people with his partner in tow. He arrives right before me. They have a mountain of items in their cart, which he starts throwing on the checkout counter. I am standing there on the other side with my one item burning with rage. Checkout girl waits until he stacks all of his crap on the counter, looks at me, looks at him, and says to him, "I'm sorry, sir. You're on the wrong side. You'll have to go to the end of the line," which is now massive. I put on my biggest grin, made eye contact with him as long as possible, and loudly told the clerk how awesome she was. Just the other day, I was at a Chinese buffet, and the three people in the booth next to me were questioning the waitress. She appeared to be Asian Hispanic, about voting for the president and who she planned to vote for. She had trouble understanding them and communicating that she could not vote. They immediately began taunting her that she shouldn't be here if she couldn't vote, that she didn't even know who the president of the United States is, and then took a picture and said they would post it on Facebook. I later found out the waitress was on a school visa and couldn't vote, but was unable to convey that to them. After the waitress walked off, one of the girls at the table, the one who took the pic, looked up and asked me where I worked because I looked familiar. When I replied, the local university in the social work department, she commented that she had recently been in my office to apply to our program, to which I replied, "Yes, I remember you, and I'm also on the admissions committee," followed with a wink. The color drained from her face, and she knew she was screwed. Karma's a jerk. TLDR, I provided unsolicited marriage counseling services to a jerkwad. I worked at a hotel several years ago and had to deal with insufferable pricks about a dozen times a day. Hotel stories about Billy Mays watching granny adult films, a person that threw hot coffee in my face, a person that spit on me, and a crazy lady that slapped me are in my comment history. The best/most evil revenge I ever got was on a guy that stayed with us 4 days a week for the entire 5 years I worked at the hotel. The big utility company in our area was having financial issues, and he was the leader of the auditing team that was sent in to straighten it out. Anyway, I would interact with the guy at least a few times every day I worked, and he was always very rude and condescending. As an example, one of his coworkers would ask me for a local restaurant recommendation, and he would chime in with, "Yeah," because minimum wage workers are known for their taste in fine dining. If someone asked me for something personal, he would say something like, "Ask him what life choices he made to be here plunging toilets and writing down my preferred wake-up call time. Maybe he can share his wisdom so we all avoid his fate." Stuff like that. He was just a jerk to everyone on the hotel staff and was always very demanding. Since I saw him every day, I noticed that he had developed a relationship with one of the younger women on his auditing team. I saw the romance blossom from flirting to full-on groping and grinding in the hotel lobby. One day, he had just finished delivering one of his delightfully crappy bon mots to me, and I was fuming. Then he screamed at one of my coworkers because she had a Filipino accent, and he said he only wanted his room cleaned by, quote, white Americans. I vowed revenge. His wife called in to speak to him later that night, like she usually did, and I said, "Oh, I think he's sleeping in Mrs. Blank's room tonight. One moment, please." And then I connected his wife to her room. His wife must not have told him what I had said, because he didn't try to get me fired. They got a divorce. They didn't have kids, but according to another guy on the auditing team, his wife got the house and custody of their dog. He stopped staying with us shortly after the phone call. I was riding my bike to work one day, and when crossing a street, in the legal zone with the walk sign, a woman ran me over. She drove through the crosswalk looking to turn right and ran right into me. She stopped after I got bumped hard enough by her fender to take a spill and have some bruising all down my side. She gave me an exasperated, "my bad" wave and continued to talk on her cell phone, ignoring me as I picked myself and my bike up. I walked right up to her open window, grabbed her cell phone from her ear, and chucked it into a nearby parking lot as hard as I could. I swear that was the farthest I have thrown anything in my life. She gaped at me in shock as I struggled back onto my bike and slowly rode off, fuming yet victorious. Then a half-mile farther on my trek, I got attacked by a goose. Not my best day. TLDR, woman hit me with her car, got revenge, got attacked by goose. Edit, those who have pointed out that riding a bike in a crosswalk is not legal are correct. In this particular instance, it was not a sidewalk but a designated bike path. They had a normal walk signal at an intersection, but I believe it was still acceptable to ride across as it was a bike-specific path. I could be wrong though. I work in local theater, and we have a lot of rude, awful women who are part of local ballet schools come through our venue who are the mothers of the dancers. Once, this woman rang up wanting seats to an almost sold-out ballet performance that had been on sale for 4 months the day before the show and did nothing but abuse me for 5 minutes because she left buying them too late. Whined about how she shouldn't have to pay for her kids, whined that we should get a bigger venue, it seats just under 500, then put me on hold while she rang 3 of her relatives to see if they wanted seats too. She was positively awful. The seats I was about to sell her were the only ones in the theater left, and there were good seats. While I'm on hold, a grandma of one of the ballerinas comes to the desk and asks if we have any seats left, as she'd been in hospital and couldn't buy them earlier, but said she'd understand if we were booked out. I put the phone with the on-hold music down and sold this old lady the last seats for the show and gave her an invite to our next year's dance season for her granddaughter and herself, so she'd know exactly when all the important dates were coming. She thanked me over and over, and she's now one of our regulars and brings her grandkids to our shows. 2 minutes after the old lady leaves, the jerk on the other end finally takes me off hold and says she wants the remaining seats that we have left. I tell her, "Sorry, we've just sold out while you had me on hold, I'm afraid. Better luck next year. Anything else I can help you with?" She was choking with rage on the other end of the phone. It was fantastic. I watched a lazy shopper park their grocery cart right behind another person's car instead of putting it in the cart return. I got out of my car, ran up and moved the cart, and put it behind her car. I then ran off and watched her have to get back out of her car since she couldn't back out, and then finally proceed to put up her cart the right way. I felt like a champion of the people. Saw a woman with her husband toss a squash into a cooler that they apparently didn't want anymore. As they walked away, I picked up the squash and followed them. They left their cart for a moment, so I put the squash into their cart and walked away. She had a dumbfounded look on her face when she noticed it back in her cart. I put it in a very noticeable place and proceeded to put it on a nearby shelf, and they walked away. I, of course, took it off the shelf and followed them again, doing a drive-by drop-off of the squash. At this moment, my girlfriend got fed up with my antics and made me stop. I would have done it until they gave up and bought the squash, or I was caught. I'm very easily amused. Heard this from a DJ in my hometown. He's pushing his cart of groceries out of the store and over to his car when a woman pulls into the handicap spot in front of the store. No placard, no handicap plates. Jumps out of the car without so much as a limp and heads into the store. He gives her this stink eye about taking up a handicap spot, and she snarls, "Deal with it," and sashays into the store. This guy is mad. He sees a couple cops who were leaning against their cars talking. They hadn't seen it, so he goes over and tells them the story. They smile and say they'll handle it. He puts his groceries in his car, and as he's pushing his cart back to the store to put it in the rack, good guy DJ, he says the cops have blocked the lady's car with theirs and were leaning against their car waiting for her. As he's putting his cart in the rack, the lady comes out of the store with her purchase, sees the cops, and almost craps herself. The fine in California is $250 to $500 for a first offense. Priceless. He walks over to her and says, "I dealt with it." Female Redditor. I was out at the local watering hole having a few beers with a group of friends. The group became larger and larger with time. After a while, I got semi-separated from my fiancé. I was introduced to a guy. We'll call him Bob. The introduction went like this. "Bob, this is Psychocentric. Psychocentric, Bob." To which he says, Every psychocentric I've ever met is a slut and unfaithful. Now, I don't get bent out of shape without good reason, so I just brush it off as drunk banter, or maybe a recent breakup with a psychocentric and say, well, I neither, but nice to meet you anyway, Bob, and shook his hand. The rest of the night, he would go to the bar, walk back, and give me the stink eye. For whatever reason, he didn't like me. The feeling was becoming mutual. I decided ignoring him would probably be best. He was certainly not in his right mindset, right? A few hours passed and I was sitting by his female friend, having fun talking and giggling. He puts his elbows on the table in between us, staring at me like I had done him wrong somehow. I just kept on with our conversation and ignored him. He then puts his nasty face right next to mine and says, "So, are you a slut?" My temper and alcohol got the best of me, and I yelled, "No, and what is your problem exactly? I've been doing my best to ignore you. Get a clue." He then chest bumped me and said, "Do you want to go?" I'm all for equal rights, but this was the first time an able-bodied adult male has asked me, a girl, if I wanted to throw down. I walk over a few steps to my fiancé, who was talking to a bouncer friend of ours, and said, "This guy says he wants to kick my butt," while the douche just keeps advancing. The bouncer looks at him, gives a hand signal, and soon 5 red shirts, bouncer uniforms, surround him. He was, quote, escorted out of the bar and went to his minivan, drunk. I called work. I work for the sheriff's department. They got a good tip on a sure thing DUI. I might not have thrown down, but I think I won that round.
Hey Reddit, which double standard irritates you the most? The other day, I got a new iPhone from AT&T. I told the salesperson I didn't want to make any changes to my account. 2 days later, I get an email saying, "Congrats on signing up for cell phone insurance for $9.99 a month." Not once did this salesperson utter the words cell phone insurance. If I walk into an AT&T every month and steal $9.99, I would go to jail. When a salesperson steals an extra $9.99 a month from me, they call it cross-selling and don't see anything wrong with it. Work over 12 to 15 hours a day to get your project in by deadline is fine, but don't you dare show up 5 minutes late the next day. Paid based on a 40-hour week, trend towards 50 to 60 hours on average. Edit, should point out that I love the job and I feel I get paid a good rate. Just annoyed after getting called out by the sales staff who don't have to pull extended shifts. I work for a small business, 8 employees. Smokers, 4 of the 8 of us, are allowed smoke breaks whenever they feel like it. We aren't given regular coffee breaks or lunch, during which they aren't required to punch out or put anything other than, and I quote management here, a reasonable time limit on. I don't smoke, but I do like a bit of fresh air every now and then, so I go outside for 3 to 5 minutes and check my email or read the news on my phone. This is completely unacceptable to my boss because, and let me quote her directly again, "Phones are an addiction that waste company time." I asked her why smokers aren't held to the standard, and I was told, quote, "Smokers need to smoke. You don't need to read the news." A double standard imposed on me by my mother-in-law. Conversation happened earlier. Mother-in-law, if I ever catch you cheating on your wife, I'll cut you with a machete. Me, silent. Neighbor, but Mother Lily, your sons are horn dogs and have different children from different mothers. Are you going to cut them too? Mother-in-law, now why would I cut my own sons? P.S. I don't cheat on my wife. My hippie friends who believe modern medicine is evil and that chemicals are dangerous to the point of never taking paracetamol or even believing things like vaccines are bad. Maybe I use the word friends too broadly, but they don't give a crap about snorting white powder that they've bought from a guy they barely know, which is very likely 20% actual white powder and 80% miscellaneous white powder. The irony is that most of that miscellaneous white powder is probably paracetamol. 5-minute smoke break? Sure. 5 minutes for fresh air? Screw you. Get back to work. Acknowledging the existence of children trying to interact with me. I'm a guy. Example. Was a cashier and this kid with some mental disorder, Downs I think, always loved to talk to me when his parents were going through cash. His dad said he always remembered me. Long story short, got hauled into the office by my boss and I was told my behavior was inappropriate for talking to a kid about food. Manager, you need to be a team player and help your team out. Sits in her office all day not doing jack squat. People. I want more art, music, movies, and other forms of entertainment. Also people. I don't want to pay for any of it or it isn't worth my money. Saw this one firsthand in a store once that made me laugh. Mother. All you do is waste your time playing video games. Teenage kid. You're on Facebook as much as I'm playing games. Mother. Long pause. That's different. Parent. You're wasting so much time playing those stupid video games. Followed by the parent watching TV from the moment they get home till they go to bed. This one drives me up a wall because this is what my parents like to do, specifically my mom. She doesn't do it anymore, but back when I was growing up and trying to make friends and actually interact on social spaces, she didn't understand that because it was all online that, somehow that doesn't mean anything. You have to go out and make friends. Mom, I'm making friends. Now that I have a job and make money using the internet, she doesn't yell at me, but it's that's still worth something. Mom and dad stereotype. My husband is an excellent father, but people always ask who's watching the kids when they aren't with me. Their dad? People. Oh, so he's babysitting today? Me. No, he's taking care of his freaking kids. When my political party does X messed up thing, it's okay. When yours does it, it's wrong. We won't hire you unless you have 5 years of experience working this exact job. Your uncle's cousin already works here? Welcome aboard, person with 0 experience. This post is from 6 years ago, and I like how this has happened so often that we now have a word for it, which is Nepo baby. As a teacher, there are times I would love to be able to put an arm around a student who is crying, or have a student come back to my room for extra help if they are struggling. But I'm male, so that can't happen. We are literally told by our administration never to do any of that if we are male. I understand the concern, but to the point where you literally can't offer any support to a student because of what might be taken out of context, that's doing way more harm than good. Dancing. I don't like to go dancing because I don't understand what you're supposed to do. You just dance. Do whatever feels right. Does dance. No, not like that. There's no one right way to dance, just as there's no one wrong way to subscribe to Am I the Genius and Am I the Jerk, linked in the description below. As always, thanks for watching. I'm a lady. I can't stand how men aren't allowed to be caregivers, or like children. Man can't comfort a child or be at a park with his own without being accused of a crime. Man wants to stay at home with the kids? He's lazy and making the woman do all the work. It's crap. Equality means that men should be allowed to do the same roles as women and vice versa. I'm a male substitute teacher, and when I first started, another male sub told me, do not ever spend a second with a child by yourself. He also said, do not ever get too close to the kids and keep your hands visible at all times. A week later, I was caught with the student alone because she needed a pass to go to the nurse right before recess. The female principal had a talk with me and told me she was telling the parents of the child. Then I got fired. I emailed the vice superintendent and let him know I'm 18 and I've just graduated from the school district I work for. He said they weren't accusing me of anything, and after me explaining if they weren't accusing me of anything, they can't fire me. They gave me my job back. Have never and will never sub at that school again, and no other elementary schools at that. Edit. This was in Texas near Dallas. My district allows subs at 18 with a high school diploma, but it's a district-by-district decision. The principal of this school made it very clear to me that it was because I was a male teacher and the student was female. I'm in college now studying to become a graphic design/AV teacher in preferably high school. Before the incident, I worked all ages, K through 12th grade. After, I refused to work with elementary, and they prohibited me from working with the high school after finding out I had only just graduated. So I work mostly with 5th through 8th grade. Anytime I take my daughters to the park, it is painfully obvious that I am excluded or frowned at if I'm too close to their kids. It especially happens when mom groups are there together. It's not my fault that they're too busy sitting on the bench chatting to notice that their kids are now on top of the swing set and they didn't notice until I helped them down. You have no idea how it feels to be in a movie theater and have a mother get up and move her kids when you sit down. Or to be walking to your car and have a woman look over her shoulder, pull out her keys and pepper spray, then start power walking towards her car in fear. So many other similar things like this occur as well. It's basically someone calling you a criminal just because you are going about your normal life. When Aphrodite lies around naked in a giant shell, she's a goddess. But when I do it, I'm drunk and no longer welcome at the aquarium. Old people have this opinion that all young people are rude, yet in reality are the most rude, selfish, and impatient people you will ever meet. I live in the UK. It's amazing how they think they're being perfectly reasonable, but they're actually being completely biased and outright hypocritical without even realizing it. Edit. I know the feeling for those of you who work in retail and have to deal with these types of people on a regular basis. I work on checkouts in a store that, quite appropriately, rhymes with Painsbury's, and I get the same abuse. I just want to say that even though people give you crap, it is absolutely not an easy job to do. So well done for always keeping your cool. It's hard sometimes, I know. Edit 2. I am in no way implying all old people are jerkwads, but there's definitely a large portion of them who seem to follow this bias where I'm from.
Ugh, you millennials are so self-centered. All you do is whinge. You have no regard for your elders. Shame on you. You're going to be working in retail all your life. Do you know how to do anything?
Susan, a 55-year-old who refuses to leave the store until her expired $1 off coupon is accepted. It's because at that point in life, you stopped giving a crap about what people think entirely. Some people take that and act like a jerkwad because they don't care if someone is affected. Some people go the other way and figure there's no point stressing about things that don't matter. My two grandmothers were the opposite ends of these spectrums. One would scream at the bus driver because the price of a ticket had gone up since she first moved here. 50 years ago, Nan. Let it go, love. And one would happily sit in a restaurant if her food took 40 minutes to come out because, quote, I haven't got anywhere to be anyway, and it's nice to be out. In my building, there's this old lady. We always said good morning to one another or smiled, so she obviously knew I lived here. To enter my building, you need a key. Once it was raining and windy outside, and my key was lost somewhere in my bag under a pile of books, papers, and God knows what else. So I was freezing, searching frantically through my bag for the key when I see her coming out. I think, great, she'll let me in. She went out of the building and closed the door behind her while pushing me out so I could not come in, all the time looking at me suspiciously. I can't let you in if you don't have the key, she said. A couple of days later, the same situation occurred, except it was me coming out and she was looking for her key. I seized the opportunity for revenge and did exactly the same thing, closing the door in front of her face and telling her I couldn't let her in without a key. She was still screaming obscenities at me while I walked away. WTF? You reap what you sow. If you won't respect me, I won't respect you. Which doesn't sound like a double standard, but when you consider what context it's used in, it changes. My father used to say this when I wouldn't do exactly as he commanded me to. The issue is that there are levels of respect. While it might sound like if you won't treat me with a certain amount of respect, I won't show the same amount back, but it is executed as, if you won't respect me as an authority, I won't respect you as a basic human. Letting them treat you with way less respect than you treated them while still being fair in their eyes. If a girl sleeps with tons of guys, she has a reputation, but if I do it, all of a sudden I'm gay? Went to school with a guy who was caught making out with a dude and filleting another dude, claimed he wasn't gay. He has since come out as gay and no one cared because we knew it all along. Edit, the filleting and making out were two separate incidents. I'd have been more impressed if it was at the same time. Really annoys me when people complain about globalization but won't let go any of the benefits. People complain viciously about jobs being outsourced to Asia but will fight to the death for their right to buy a toaster for $4. This right here. My extended family cracks me up because they all work for big three automakers, and more power to them, but will complain about not, quote, buying American. Never mind the fact that automotive is a very global industry and the most, quote, American car pound for pound is actually a Toyota because of how Toyota sources its components. Women can wear a million different cuts of shirts, pants, skirts, or dresses and still be business casual. Men, all we get is long pants and long sleeve or short sleeve button-downs. Oh, and maybe a polo. Screw that. It's too freaking hot here 90% of the time. I at least want to wear shorts. Been there. Had a woman for a boss who said men may only wear dress shoes and pants and button-down shirts. and we had zero contact with customers. Women could wear what they wanted. One very hot summer day, all the ladies were wearing sundresses and sandals, so I asked why women had a different set of standards. Her only reply, men's feet stink. If skirts are in the dress code, wear one. I did it one freaking time. I was called into the boss's office before my shift even started. He asked why. I said it was hot, wearing this was cooler, and within the dress code. He said, "You've made your point. The dress code will be amended to allow for shorts." By the first break of the morning, the new dress code was on the wall of the break room, and I was, quote, the hero in the paisley print skirt. Malicious compliance has been a specialty of mine ever since then. When/if you are 35 plus, regardless of career success, if you don't have a family and children by then, as a man, you're typically just labeled as a bachelor still enjoying the single life. When you're a woman, it's like you're some depressing spinster who has forsaken their gender by not fulfilling their expected mom duties that are unfortunately ingrained in the woman identity the media has created. Screw that momopia. Edit. It's really fascinating that a lot of people immediately assume that these fictitious people both want kids, but, quote, lost the game, or, quote, timed out of their biological clock. The point I'm trying to make is that a child-free life shouldn't be considered a you lost or ran out of time situation at all. Reproducing shouldn't be expected, and it shouldn't affect one's self-image. This is probably my favorite post on this thread. As someone who's a member of the LGBTQ community, Happy Pride Month, by the way, the topic of having children hardly comes up within our circles. A lot of the time, we don't want them, and that's fine. There are plenty of people who do that for us anyway. For the people in the community who do want them, that's perfectly fine too. It should never affect the image of someone if they start a family or not. Being a teenager. Hey, you're almost an adult now. You must be responsible for yourself and do things on your own. What the heck? Do exactly what I tell you. Don't try to make decisions by yourself. Oh my god, that nerd is way too into that video game. Now excuse me, but I need to go spend a crap ton of time and money on Clash of Clans. I know that most people are thinking gender politics, but as a Christian, I'm most bothered when others believers rail against Sharia law and Muslim fundamentalism while trying to impose their own fundamentalist legal vision on others. Edit. I don't mean to equate extreme Islamic fundamentalism with American Christian fundamentalism. I could have drawn a more common example from my own life as a teacher. My pastor has been very open about how I should be able to share my faith with my public school students in a way that he would not tolerate from a Muslim teacher. That's the double standard at its heart, but in a less extreme form. He and many others want to preserve prayer in schools, Christmas, and the 10 Commandments, but they do not want likewise expression for other beliefs. Also, I've spent my day teaching about lynchings in U.S. history, so I'm not in the mood to pretend that Christian fundamentalism can't get as extreme as Sharia. It's not the point I'm arguing, but it's not an invalid point in modern history. Don't trust Muslims, they'll force Sharia law on you. Now vote for this nice man who wants to ban gay marriage and teach creationism in school. I've never been ashamed of being a Christian, but I've sure as heck been ashamed of being in the same religion as some of these people. Men don't cry. Every single instance that says men aren't supposed to show emotions, tears, or anything that could be considered a, quote, weakness ticks me off to no end. Bonus irritation points if that's considered a sign of homosexuality, as if that's a weakness. Sadness isn't exclusively feminine. Bottling up emotions is one of the most toxic things I've ever done, and I'm probably still doing it unconsciously due to my upbringing. I'm certain that most men are. And that's messed up. Female friend shares a post on Facebook with the title, "Hot male French farmers pose topless for calendar because why not?" The comments and amount of likes the post received baffled me. If I was to share a post of a load of female models, because why not, I would be ridiculed or called perverted. And I know that 10 to 20 of my male friends wouldn't be posting comments like, "Heart eyes emoji, January though." Girl, how tall are you? Me, 6'1". Why? Girl, oh good, because I only date at least 6 feet tall guys. Me, how much do you weigh? Girl, not your business. Girl on matches. Probably my own. That's to say, noticing the hypocrisy in my beliefs and actions. If I can't call BS on myself, then I don't have much of a right to call it on others. Hopefully, I'm arcing toward improvement. but I have a lot of work to do. People complaining online about people using their phone while driving, by taking a photo of that person while they themselves are driving. I can do what offends you because it's freedom. You can't do what offends me because it's not politically correct. Ooh, the urge to attend a conservative Christian family dinner and call my grandma, grandpa, and my grandpa, grandma. Now we'll see how they really feel about pronouns. Oh, you know I'm not your grandpa, right? And I'm not your grandma. So you like being called what you prefer, huh? Most people give the older generations grief about using computers. In my experience, I've seen plenty of millennials who can use their phone but don't understand how to use basic office software. In my experience, nothing 15 minutes in the help of Google can't solve. Your coworkers are absolutely free to joke about how they're going to drink a glass of wine or a whole bottle by myself when they finally get home from work. If I mention I take a couple hits of weed from a vaporizer before going to bed, they'll think I'm an addict that can't make it through life without a crutch. Talking about the historic slave trade in/from Africa is encouraged. Talking about non-African slave trade, example, the Irish being sold to the Caribbean, I know is called indentured servitude, makes you a racist. My SO and I are of different ethnicities, but we agreed that it's pretty messed up. We can't figure out why people, black or white, have such an issue with this. People get really angry about it. I'm American, so maybe that has something to do with it? Can't we just agree slavery is a crappy thing to do all around, no matter what you call it? Women are allowed to wear men's clothes, and nobody cares too much. Being a tomboy is normal. Men aren't allowed to wear women's clothes in public. That's too weird for everyone else. Being against abortion, but giving absolutely no craps about the mother's health/financial situation and the child's health or well-being. We blatantly accept lies from our corrupt governments. When whistleblowers reveal information on said governments, they're traitors. Yeah, I'ma let you in on a little secret. The reason why whistleblowers are given a complimentary deep tissue head massage from the CIA when they expose corruption is because those powers want to stay unopposed and will do whatever it takes to keep it that way. Late to the party, but my girlfriend and I have one that she finds funny and I just find irritating. Both of us train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's like wrestling with chokeholds and attempted limb snapping for the uninitiated. As with any combat sport, you get roughed up all the time, and anyone who trains a few times a week constantly has bruises. Bruises on the shins, arms, and wrists are especially common. If people see either of our bruises and feel the need to comment, the reaction is very different for me being a guy and her being a girl. To me, oh, did you get in a fight? To her, who's hurting you? There are hotlines you can call. This happened with me and my fiancé with different sports. I've been playing rugby since I was 14, and he plays hockey. You get banged up playing both those things. Once I took an elbow to the face and broke my nose. He took me to the ER, where they saw me with a broken nose and his black eye from a game a few days before, and separated us under the guise of, quote, needing to look at me alone. I got told repeatedly there were resources for me to leave if I needed to, financial or otherwise. Meanwhile, he got interrogated by a nurse in the waiting area over my nose and how it happened. Never mind the fact that we were both roughed up, and if we were fighting, he could have easily been the victim defending himself in this situation. They just saw a man who's older than me and registered it as him beating the crap out of me and me afraid to leave him. Late night store clerks. What are the strangest things that have happened on the job? I work nights at a gas station in a pretty good neighborhood in New Hampshire, so usually it's pretty boring. One night, I did have a customer really creep me out. I was just getting ready to close down the store when a little old man came in. He was small and dressed in khakis and a button-down shirt. I made the usual small talk of asking him how his day was going. Then, as I was handing him his change, he firmly grabbed my wrist, made direct eye contact with me, and said, "Hell is a real place, and the devil has already got his hand on you, girl. Be careful." I worked third shift at a Sheetz. For those of you who don't know, it's a gas station/convenience store/fast food place. On multiple occasions, I have been cussed out because we discontinued pickle chips. I've had people tell me to screw off, break things, demand to call corporate, etc. Drunk people love pickle chips. Edit, I get it, sober people love pickle chips too. I've never been a store clerk, but I was lucky enough to witness the following story. 7-Eleven, circa 1996. A guy walks up to the surly clerk. who seemed to work 25 hours a day, and asks, "Do you sell eggs by the half dozen?" Clerk, "No, you have to buy a dozen." Guy, "I only need 6. Clerk, "I don't care. You get 12 or you get 0. Without saying another word, the guy walks back to get his dozen eggs, pays, and walks out. Then he throws his 6 unwanted eggs at the store window before driving off. I worked 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift in an all-night garage for a few months when I was 18. There was this weird Vietnamese dude who always drove a white Honda Prelude and always filled up with 666 pounds of petrol. He wore the same pair of cutoffs every time, with blotches and bruises all over his legs, and used to literally wander in, leaning against the displays, pick up as many yogurts as he could carry, pay with the 50-pound note, and stagger out. One time he came in with these 2, obviously prostitute women, who were draped all over him with the biggest pupils I have ever seen. They stood at the counter while I scanned all their yogurts, and he spoke for the first and only time. Staring at me, said to the women, "She can join us, can't she?" One of the women looked at me and said, "You'll make a lot more money if you come with us, darling." I nervously laughed, took their cash, and they left, grinning in silence. The place I worked had a monitor/camera that showed you on it as you walked it. It was like 10 minutes before closing, and a guy walks in and just starts rapping into the camera and acting like he's shooting a music video. He went through an entire song. A man came in 10 times within a single hour. He kept leaving and coming back without buying a single thing. Finally, on the 10th time, he comes up to the counter with a box of tampons. I proceed to ask him, "Rough night?" To which he responded, "I really don't want to talk about it." Had a guy pull up to the pump, unhooked it wanting post-pay. Our policy said not to authorize it between midnight and 5 a.m., which was prepay only. I announced this to the dude over the loudspeaker. I'm pretty sure he was wasted. He continued to get more and more belligerent. When he started beating the pumps with the nozzle/hose, I called the cops. Dude starts banging on the door. Locked, no way he could get in. Can't, gets frustrated, and finally just whips his deal out and starts wagging it in the general direction of the store. The CCTV is getting all this, so I just start laughing my butt off. Then, the cops pull up, and 2 deputies put this poor, drunk, deal-wagging man away in the back of a police car. I quit a few months after that. I worked at a small convenience store in the early 1990s. They had one of those fry delis that had chicken, JoJo's, corn dogs, burritos, etc. This particular night, I had run out of burritos and chicken. I also shut the thing down and cleaned it all out about an hour before closing. About 5 minutes before I was closing up, a guy walked in and asked for some burritos. I told him I was out of them, and that I was just about to close and the fryer was shut down. He walked around the store for a minute. I assumed he was looking for something else to buy, and then he came up to the counter, pulled out a knife, and told me if I didn't cook him some burritos, he was going to stab me. I freaked out, but told him I had none to cook. I showed him the freezer and told him I would happily cook anything he wanted from it, but he will see I was out of burritos. He looked at it for about a minute, turned to me, and said, "You really are out." I replied, "Yeah." He then put the knife away and left the store. Edits. Just to clarify, a JoJo is basically a deep-fried potato wedge. They were very popular where I grew up. I guess there are other names for them in other parts of the country, but where I grew up, we called them JoJos, and you ordered them by weight. For example, you would say, "Give me a half pound of JoJo's." Also, as far as I know, the guy never got caught. I called the police and described the guy, but never heard from them again, so I assume he got away. The burrito bandito could still be roaming the streets. And thanks for the gold, kind burrito-loving soul. It's official. My highest rated comment ever is about nearly being stabbed over a burrito. A guy came in to buy beer after hours. Told him I couldn't sell. It was against the law. He pulled out a badge, said, "I am the law." I called 911 and a cop shows up. Tells me if I can just let it go, I wouldn't have any more problems. I let it go. 2 weeks later, driving home late at night, way over the speed limit, I got pulled over. It was cop number 2. He came up to the car, recognized me, said, "Slow down," and left. I used to work the graveyard at a gas station near my place. A pretty normal night. Clean, stock smokes, clean again, sit behind the counter. A woman came in about mid-30s with a little boy with her. She was in tears and her clothes were torn a bit. She came up and asked to use the phone. When she got off without getting an answer, she asked to stay here for a bit. I told her it would be no problem. About 20 minutes go by, and I wound up giving her and her kid free drinks and one of the sandwiches we have on the hot rack. She was in the store for about 30 minutes until her, quote, boyfriend came in and found her and her kid. He was pretty calm at first, but then started screaming at her and telling her she needs to come with him. Luckily, before anything crazy happened, a cruiser pulled up to the front and 2 cops came in and intervened. He was arrested right there. I guess he had been beating her in front of her kid and she was trying to run away. I'm glad I got to keep her away from harm for at least a little bit. It was a scary night. Let's see. Closed the store to play hockey on the roof. Had a guy come in and, quote, inspect individual eggs in each carton until he found the perfect egg. Had an old guy who asked to use our bathroom, but first he needed reading material and asked for an adult mag from behind the counter. But when we gave it to him, he said he didn't like that one and asked for a different one. Then he died while taking a crap. You know, normal stuff like that.
I actually used to work retail for a couple months. Craziest interaction I ever had was a guy who came up to me and started striking up conversation, but what he said really stuck out to me. He said, "You should subscribe to Am I the Genius and Am I the Jerk, linked in the description below." I just kind of nodded and thanked him for watching. Some people. Huge guy comes in and asks to use the restroom. No big deal. I'm not one to stand in the way of nature. Well, maybe 20 minutes later, guy comes out in a huff and says, "Dude, I'm really sorry. I screwed up your toilet. It's all good, man. I'll get it." Not really needing spectators while I cleaned crap, I expect the guy to shrug his shoulders and walk off. Well, he looks back into the back where the restroom is with a look of disgusting concern and says, "Man, it's really coming out. Like, it's coming out into the back room." I rush back, thinking I've got to at least stop this from becoming some kind of biohazard event. I round the corner and there's nothing, but I can smell an unholy, overwhelming stench. I continue back, expecting to ruin my shoes at any moment until I reach the men's room. At this point, I've had to cover my face with my shirt and focus on breathing through my mouth, but I reach the door with no issue. Frustrated from the mind-numbing odor alone, I push the men's room door open, ready for at least an inch of gas station dukes all over the floor. As the door swings forward, I see nothing but water filling my eyes and the black/brown human paint the fat jerk left against the back of the bowl. Ticked to the point of rushing out, fully intending on asking this rotten jerk what the deal was, I round the corner again to see his big, poop-eating grin spread across his face. Stinks, huh? TLDR, got jigsawed in the breathing in noxious fumes. I worked at a 24/7 gas station in a small college town. One night, the club across the street had a fight break out and about 50 people were pepper sprayed by the police when they responded at about 1:30 a.m. 5 minutes later, cue 50 angry clubgoers bursting into the store, running to the dairy cooler, dousing themselves in milk, and then running back out. I just stood there in utter confusion and then told my boss I didn't want the late shift anymore. Edit, man, I really missed out on an amusing pun with utter confusion, huh? Not a late night clerk, as my store closes at 9, but some pretty strange things have happened. In no particular order, a woman tried to tell me that Jesus could talk to her through her eyes and that we were all going to hell. A man came in for no reason other than to take a dump in aisle 3. Some guy tried to come in and steal cigarettes from behind our counter and may have gotten away with it if he had not then tried to buy cigarettes with the other ones stuffed down his shirt. 2 different people have tried to lock themselves in our bathroom and tell us that that was their home now. Once a week, someone will try to buy our entire cereal aisle, just pulling entire displays off the shelf and trying to do it as quickly as possible, like getting into a line is some sort of free pass and we have to let them buy the stuff. An ex-employee one time came back in after hours as we were closing down stuff for the night and started to work. She was behind the deli counter just cutting meat, talking to invisible customers. We later found out she was high on pills. A guy got locked in our bathroom freezer after hours. We only knew he was there because he escaped and broke a window that set off our alarms. That was the first time we replaced the giant display windows. The second time was right after we had just shut down for the night. Kids on bikes threw rocks through our windows. The sound was terrifying. Even though we had them on camera, the store never pressed charges. Story time. In high school, I worked at a little mom-and-pop department store. We sold odds and ends at super high prices, and they eventually went out of business when I was a couple of years into college. Anyway, one night I was working a closing shift, and that involved shutting down the registers, turning off all the lights, etc.
We had just stocked these baby doll toys on the shelf that day, those motion-sensing ones that giggled and cooed when you got close to them. Well, the lights turning off must have triggered them, because after the first chunk goes out, we hear coos. Second chunk goes out, giggles. Third chunk goes out, and we hear, "Islam is the light!" Needless to say, we whipped those suckers back to the manufacturer. They didn't know about the propaganda babies because they only said that phrase randomly, so it must have gotten past whatever testing process they had. Very freaky to hear in a dark store at night. I watched a truck pull up to one of our pumps. Guy gets out to pump gas. A Durango comes hauling it from the back of the building. Another guy gets out with a gun aimed at the first guy. I was on the phone with a friend of mine and said, "Someone just pulled a gun at the pump. I'm gonna have to let you go." I called the cops. Turned out the guy pumping gas had robbed a store 3 towns over, and the Durango was an undercover cop who had been in pursuit. Another time, a guy came in, walked to the back cooler, got a can of Sprite, and came to the register to check out. As I'm ringing him up, one of our local cops walks in, gun drawn, says, "Put your hands on the counter, put your hands on the counter now." Well, I put my hands on the counter along with the customer because all I'm thinking is, I have no idea what I've done, but I'm very sorry for it. Turned out that guy had been involved with the robbery of a convenience store in the next town, 5 minutes away, and had fled in a Mustang with 2 other individuals. They wrecked the car trying to evade the cops. All 3 dispersed, 2 were apprehended pretty quickly, but the third came into the store to either blend in or rob me. I honestly don't know which. After the festivities and them hauling the guy away, the cop told me he had almost lost it when I put my hands on the counter too, and that I should really rethink working closing shifts at my age. I was 19 at the time, and I am female. I laughed and I was like, "Give up free entertainment?" Edit. First story to clarify, the undercover cop jumped out of the Durango with the gun pointed at the suspect. Graveyard shift at a gas station. Full serve gets shut down after 11 p.m. because there's only one clerk on site. Traffic cones block the full serve pumps, signs inform the customer. Around midnight, a van pulls up with California plates and peace love signs in the windows. Woman gets out, moves the traffic cones, and pulls up to full serve. I use the intercom to tell her that she will have to use self-serve if she wants gas. No answer. I go to the door and try to wave her over or call out to her. Can't see any sign of her. I shrug and go back inside. I'm not allowed to leave the store unattended, so there's not much I can do. 10 minutes later, a woman gets out of the van and comes in. "I've been waiting for service for over an hour," she says. I decide not to argue about the time elapsed and just say, "I'm very sorry, ma'am, but we don't offer full serve after 11. Perhaps you noticed the traffic cones and signs to that effect? You expect to pump my own gas?" she says. Again, I'm sorry. I'd be happy to help you, but I can't leave the store unattended. I appreciate your understanding. She snorts and digs a 20 out of her purse and tosses it on the counter. She goes out, moves the van to self-serve, pumps the gas. Then she comes back. "May I use your restroom, please?" she asks. "Absolutely. Right back there," I say, relieved. She goes to the restroom, and she's in there for about 15 minutes. I start to worry. Finally, she comes out and comes to the counter. "I know all about you," she says. You're the one who brought the Black Plague. You brought it all the time forever. It was always you. You caused all those deaths, all that suffering. Did you like hearing the babies wail and scream? I bet you loved it. All the demons love it. That's you. You're a demon. You are evil. I can tell. And I'll tell you something else. You skunk me up, I'll skunk you back." I stared at her, retreating back, speechless. She got in her van and drove away. Skunk her up? Because I didn't pump her gas? Weird. I went back to fronting shelves for about 30 seconds before I thought, perhaps I should check the bathroom. I walked back and pushed open the door. Poop. Poop everywhere. On the walls, the floor, the mirror, the sink, all over the toilet lid and the tank, crap on the door, clearly smeared by hand. And oh, the stench. As I turned to get the cleaning supplies, I muttered under my breath, "You skunked me back all right. Yes, you did." I worked through my college years at a grocery store in a college town. I worked in the deli/bakery and daytime cashier. One night, I was asked to work the late shift for time and a half. I didn't have class the next day, so heck yeah. It was a night I'll never forget. As I was transitioning from day to late night shift around 9 p.m., A kid came in and started just eating olives off the deli bar with his bare hands. Cops get called. He is found 5 minutes later assaulting the soda machine outside, screaming and crying at the same time. Then arrested while high on what was probably PCP or meth. A plethora of drunk sorority and frat jerks pouring in between midnight and 3 a.m. trying to buy alcohol when they were already wasted. The town had a bus system that ran all over the place for free, and we were a very central stop. Had to call a, quote, code wood to summon our late-night stalker who was indeed built like a tree trunk. Some punks wanted to steal some fillies and demanded to, quote, just hold on to them while they shopped, then got confrontational when I wouldn't give the fillies to them before paying. For clarification, since I'm a terrible writer, Wood was a night stockman who probably went to bodybuilding competitions on the weekends. Hence, I was calling him to the front to help me deal with the hooligans until the police could show up. After the cops showed up with their canine from said confrontation, she decided to hang out and talk to me for a while. She showed me a bunch of fake IDs she collected. Insomniac Kid kept coming into the store to buy food and smokes. The street sweeper guys showed up around 5 a.m. to clean the lot. They had to come inside to use the restroom. In that amount of time, their street sweeper got stolen because they left the keys in and running. Not sure if they ever got it back, but I imagine it will be hard to hide in a small college town. TLDR, what was a highly functional, prestigious college town got rather seedy at night. I also spent a lot of time reading, but I don't suppose people came here to read about my Asimov novel. Edit, Phillies are a cigarillo/blunt used to smoke weed, usually in a party scenario. They are commonly shoplifted after normal business hours. Thus, they are kept behind the counter so they are not easily accessed. Back from my days working graveyard shift at a grocery store. Let's see what I can remember. Had a former employee come in drunk one night and call the cops on himself for shoplifting because he wanted somewhere to sleep that night. Had an employee come in on a night off all ticked off, proceeds to walk straight to the back room without a word. About 10 minutes later, there was a successive loud pop, 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 pop. Turns out he climbed up to the roof to fire his gun. A customer came up and told me he heard something fall down in the back room. Tons of stoners buying ice cream at 2 a.m. Meth heads buying Brillo pads and ammonia after 3 a.m. Bars closed at 2 a.m., so all the cops were usually gone from the area by around 3. Saw a drunk guy fall asleep while his car idled along in the parking lot. Luckily, he hit a curb and no damage was done, but the cops got a good laugh out of that one. A tall, drunk Russian guy tries to buy beer after the 2 a.m. legal cutoff time, then proceeds to pick on a sober customer half his size. The little guy took one swing and broke the Russian dude's nose. Had a guy come in when another employee was taking a dump. I'm so sorry that there's so much poop in this episode, I have no idea why. Guy really had to take a dump, so we turned around and took a dump at the urinal, asking the employee on the toilet for toilet paper. In high school, I worked at a 24-hour pharmacy which also had a small selection of beer. At about 2 a.m., this guy walks in 3 sheets to the wind, saunters over to the beer, and grabs 2 12-packs. He comes up to the counter and slams the beer down, reaches into his pocket, and pulls out a half-eaten taco and puts it on the counter. I couldn't say anything because I was so perplexed. I just let him walk out with the beer and told my bosses I thought he might have a gun also. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen. A couple weeks later, he apparently tried this at the family-owned gas station across the street and got shot. I worked at Dunkin' Donuts. Every Tuesday night at about 8:45, a guy would come in. A guy in Daisy Dukes and a sequined bikini top. He was balding, had a beer gut, and chest hair. He would strut his stuff to the counter and order 2 sprinkled donuts. Every Tuesday. Honestly, I aspire to that level of confidence. Used to work third shift overnight in a Texaco 20 years ago. One night, this guy in a bright yellow Mustang comes in to buy gas and beer. I run his credit card, and the register flags it for being stolen. So I tell the guy, your car won't work. Says I have to keep it. So the guy kind of freaks out, leaves his beer, then hops in his car and speeds off. I call the cops because he already pumped his gas and left without paying for it. So later, I walk home at 6 a.m. I lived only a 5-minute walk away. As I'm walking, I see the yellow Mustang parked at an apartment complex across from the street from my house. So I go back to work and call the cops again, explaining that I know where the guy lives. Presumably, after that they found him and arrested him or whatever. A few days later, I had to do a friend a favor and take her to visit her boyfriend, who was in jail at the time. On our way out of the jail, some guy walks up to her to bum a cigarette off of her. It was the guy with the yellow Mustang. I sped up to walk ahead of them, so hopefully he wouldn't recognize my face. She gives him a cigarette and he proceeds to complain about how he got arrested because he found a credit card, so of course he was going to buy some gas and beer with it. He didn't recognize me, so I remain unmurdered. 911 operators. What is that one call that you can never forget? Many of these stories will be sad and graphic. Viewer discretion is advised. Harley motorcycle tipped over and the clutch lever went into a 4-year-old's eye. Parent was on the line asking what to do. Suddenly, she said, "They're going to lift the motorcycle." I emphatically told her to tell them to stop and wait for rescue and EMS. Rescue ended up cutting off the clutch lever and transporting the kid to the hospital. She underwent surgery. That was 1982. Just last year, I met the lead rescue officer and the girl herself, now fully grown. They wanted to meet the 911 operator that saved her vision. I'm a dispatcher for a cab company. One day, I got a call from an old man who seemed as if his voice was trembling. I'm naturally polite, as I asked for his drop-off address. He said, the emergency room. I casually said, "Feeling a little under the weather, eh?" And he responded, "I tried to take my life. I vomited most of the pills up, and now I feel miserable. Can you send a cab quick?" "Certainly, sir. Anything else I can do for you?" I talked to him for 15 minutes before the cab pulled up and the driver carried him out to his car. He told me his life story and why he tried to end it. I visited him in the hospital as soon as my shift was over. He still calls for a cab every day to take him to a barbecue restaurant. I had a call that started out pretty dumb but was actually pretty serious. 911, where's your emergency? 123 Main Street. Okay, what's going on there? I'd like to order a pizza for delivery. Oh great, another prank call. Ma'am, you've reached 911. Yeah, I know. Can I have a large with half pepperoni, half mushroom and peppers? I'm sorry, you know you've called 911, right? Yeah, do you know how long it'll be? Okay, ma'am, is everything okay over there? Do you have an emergency? Yes, I do. And you can't talk about it because there's someone in the room with you? Moment of realization. Yes, that's correct. Do you know how long it'll be? I have an officer about a mile from your location. Are there any weapons in your house? No. Can you stay on the phone with me? Nope. See you soon. Thanks. As we dispatch the call, I check the history at the address and see there are multiple previous domestic violence calls. The officer arrives and finds a couple. Female was kind of banged up, and the boyfriend was drunk. Officer arrests him after she explains that the boyfriend had been beating her for a while. I thought she was pretty clever to use that trick. Definitely one of the most memorable calls. I'm not a 911 operator, but I spent time doing OnStar/telematics type stuff, and the moments you remember are those when you're still connected to the vehicle once the dispatch has been made after an accident. I've heard a brother beg for his other brother not to die as he bled out. Not sure if he actually did. The one that has stuck with me the most is the one I initially heard the least on. Airbag signal connected to a vehicle. I heard a sigh and then silence outside. Nothing but the sounds of passing traffic. A coworker then completes the dispatch, standard procedure, and I attempt to make a contact a time or two with no luck. It's simply a matter of remaining on the line to listen to make sure the ambulance gets there. Then, a car stops, and I hear talking in the background. Soon after, someone else stops. Finally, someone starts the last rites type of prayer after asking someone to join hands. I realized then that what I heard at the very beginning of the call was their last breath. The only time that this person's entire existence crossed mine was at the last possible moment, and they don't even know it. Life is fickle. Be good to everyone. I was a 911 dispatcher for several years, and one of my most memorable calls was a hysterical woman at about midnight one stormy night. She was absolutely incomprehensible. I kept saying, ma'am, you have to calm down. I can't understand you. Ma'am. This went on for what felt like forever. I couldn't get anything useful out of her. My officers were en route to this obviously horrifying situation. Finally, she said something about being with her sister. How old is your sister? 1. Instantly suspicious, I asked, how old are you? 5. A 5-year-old boy. So that's how I inadvertently called a little boy ma'am many times. Oops. The storm had woken him up and his parents were gone. They went out to move their cars to shelter in case of hail. He was just very scared. My officers still responded and talked to the parents about not leaving sleeping children alone, but everybody was unscathed. It wasn't my most tragic call, but it is one I've never forgotten. Poor little ma'am. Just a reminder that if you like what you're hearing, remember to subscribe to Am I the Genius and Am I the Jerk, linked in the description below. Thanks for watching. My first call I ever had to dispatch on the radio. Two homeless dudes blowing each other on the bus. I'm sorry it's not serious or traumatic, but it'll always stay with me. I used to work as a relay operator, 711, and often got misdialed 911 calls. We would connect them to 911, but since they connected through us, we had to stay on the line. One time, I got an old woman who fell out of bed and couldn't get up. I connected her to 911, and from there they tracked her location. The 911 operator is like, "Ma'am, are you in such and such hospital? Are you calling from the hospital?" "Yes, I fell and no one will help me." Not sure what the 911 operator did, but about 10 minutes later, you hear someone come into her room to help her up. Apparently, this woman fell out of her hospital bed and no one noticed for over an hour until she dragged herself to the phone and called 911. I was like, note to self, never go to this hospital. 911 dispatcher here. I took a call once of a house being on fire, so of course, we send the fire department out. Soon as they arrive on the scene, they ask for the police to respond. Police don't typically respond to this area with the fire department. Turns out the story was that a girl's fiancé arrives home and dumps gas on her and lights her on fire. She then runs to the shower to try to put herself out. He follows her, turns the shower off, dumps more gas on her, and lights her back on fire. She then runs through the house, thereby lighting the house on fire. She then runs out of the house as the fire department arrives on scene. So when FD pulled up, they had arrived to a body collapsed in the yard on fire. When PD arrives, the male fiancé walks out of the burning house, lets himself into the back of a police car, and says, "Take me to jail." My mom was a 911 dispatcher for over 30 years. She had many crazy calls, but one story she told me always stuck out from the rest. One day, a man called in. With a calm voice, he told my mom he was in a local hotel and that he had doused himself with gasoline and was going to end his life. He called in so they could evacuate the hotel because, quote, "I don't want to hurt anyone else." While my mom is trying to talk him out of it, she is on another line to the hotel letting them know what's going on and to get everyone out. While emergency services are en route, she has to stay on the line whenever possible to keep people calm, reassure them help is on the way, and to try her best to keep track of what's up on the other end. As soon as the guy heard the sirens coming in the distance, he asked her if everyone had been evacuated yet. She tried to stall her answer, thinking he'd light himself up as soon as she said yes. Didn't work. Seconds later, she stated hearing the worst screams she's ever heard, and she's heard many during that job over the years, and the phone went static, and then silence. He died in that hotel and mom had to listen. Lousy day. I wasn't a 911 operator, but a supervisor for AT&T's 00 info directory information. Think 411. While remotely listening in on some agents one evening, one particular call was escalated to Tier 2 for assistance. On the other end of the line was a woman who was hysterical, saying her husband was trying to kill her. Protocol dictates that we trace the number to the local LEC, local exchange carrier, and notify law enforcement in that area. We do this, but we had no way to connect the call to the local sheriff dispatch. Silly, I know, but we technically weren't true operators, and our equipment didn't support that functionality. Basically, we had to act as a relay between the LEO and the victim on the phone. By this time, I had moved from my office to seat myself next to the Tier 2 agent to help her keep her cool while everything was going down. The agent, let's call her April, because that was her name, was handling the call very well at first, but started to lose her mind as the call progressed. While listening in on the call next to April and trying to convey what is going on to the LEO at the other line, we hear the woman who initially called in say, "He went to get an axe." "Ma'am, where are you now?" "I'm locked in the bathroom. Please hurry." The sheriff's office is on their way. They say they are 5 minutes out. Then, we hear loud banging on the door. Her husband was trying to chop his way through the door with the axe. April lost it when she heard the woman start screaming, knowing her husband was coming after her with an axe. She threw her headset off and walked away, saying something like, "I can't do it, Lucky Inc. I can't." April heads off to the ladies' room to collect herself. So I pick up the headset to reassure the lady on the phone. "Ma'am, the sheriff is at your house now. Where is your husband?" "Back bathroom. He's at the door." More loud banging from the axe. By this time, the woman was overly hysterical and crying madly. Then, "Sheriff's Department, drop the axe." "Sheriff's Department, drop the axe." Pop, 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 pop. The local LEO dispatch directed me to ask the lady to open the bathroom door, and she does. The next voice I heard on her phone was a sheriff deputy. All he said was this: "The situation is under control, operator. Disengage the call." I still get chills and all teary thinking about it. Hi guys. I actually am a 911 operator. First ever 911 I answered was about a naked man sitting in a bathtub on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. He was drunk, and we still don't know where he got the tub. Edit, West Tennessee, since everyone keeps asking. The one that stayed with me gave childbirth instructions to a deaf father via relay for his deaf wife. They were the victims of a home invasion and were tied to chairs. Burglars saw her in labor, panicked, then left. Took Dad hours to free himself and call. While giving the instructions, I obtained a suspect description to put out to surrounding agencies. They were caught in the city to our north during the call. Baby boy was born perfectly healthy. I worked in a call center a few years ago. Not for 911, but for general purchases for car parts. Anyway, some guy phones me asking for a car part, find the part number, and place the order as I would normally do. I then hear him sigh and begin to cry. Naturally, I ask if everything is okay, and his response is, "You don't want to listen to my problems, mate." Me being a kind guy who wanted to get rid of some of his shift, I said, "Sure, what's up?" and ended up having so many feels. Turns out his wife had motor neuron disease and had very recently passed away, and he was fixing up her car to sell it on. He said it got to the stage where she couldn't walk, then couldn't speak, couldn't do basic tasks such as dress herself or shower, etc. Eventually, she didn't even recognize his face, and the disease ultimately took her. He then tells me about how he has to move house as he can't stand to be in the property without his wife anymore, and that he had 80,000 pounds worth of pills in a drawer that he had nothing to do with. He said he'll probably donate them to charity. Anyway, after about a 50-minute conversation with him, he was so glad that he asked for the company address. Now, I was new on the job, so I didn't realize the dangers of disclosing this information, but I gave it to him, and that Christmas, I received a card from him saying thanks for taking the time to listen to him, and that it really helped him get through a tough time just speaking to someone about it. So yeah, he was such a nice guy, and I'll remember him for the rest of my days because he really made an impact on me with the story. TLDR, guy orders car parts, cries, I proceed to have so many feels. Edit, oh my goodness, first gold, thank you so much. I honestly never expected such a great response. Edit 2, relearning about motor neuron disease and having so many flashbacks of the guy's explanation as to what it does exactly, etc. Wouldn't wish this upon your worst enemy. Edit 3, I'd like to thank everyone for all the nice comments and PMs I'm receiving. Also, the hourly rate for the car part therapist has increased from free to £150 per hour. I'm actually a police call taker. Throwaway because it's about time I made one and because confidentiality. But sorry, the reason you're not getting many real answers is because we can't talk about much. Got a call just yesterday on the non-emergency line from a very old, very proud German-Canadian man who just babbled on for 5 minutes straight about having come to Canada before World War II in a boat with windows and helped build Canada and loved Harper and he built skyscrapers and was a plumber and blah 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 and would not be interrupted. I just sat back on mute and laughed my butt off. When I finally went to kick him off the line, he finished with, "Long live AmITheA! Long live Canada! I love everybody! I love this place!" Yes, I know my accent is bad. Before my grandma died, we had to call 911 to get her to the hospital. An older lady, for some reason still an EMT, or first responder, I forgot, came to the house. She had trouble getting up all the stairs to the front door and fell backwards. She thought she hit her head, so she touched it and saw blood all over her palm. In reality, she just scraped her hands, but thought the blood was from her head, so she fainted. We had to call another ambulance. So, as a med student, I worked as an emergency phone operator for night shifts. One unusually quiet night, I had a call at about 3 a.m. A nice old lady was asking for just somebody to talk to because she had insomnia and just woke up from a terrible nightmare. Now, usually I was angry when something like this happened. People calling in the middle of the night for some BS that clearly isn't a medical emergency. But this old woman was so sweet and polite that I decided to just have a nice talk with her. Also, all the other lines were quiet at the time. She told me her name and that ever since her husband was sent to a nursing home several weeks ago, she was afraid that something terrible might happen to him. About 1 hour ago, she awoke and just felt that something bad had happened, and now she felt so anxious and alone at home, just wanted to hear a human voice, someone to talk to. She kept excusing herself for calling in the middle of the night and wasting my time. And then I got a call on the second line. It was the nursing home where her husband was sent. "Yo, we got a dead here. Died 1 hour ago. Send over the doctor for a death certificate." Needless to say, The man who just died had the same last name as the nice lady I had been talking to. I am a 911 operator. My favorite call I personally took that I won't forget is about a couple at McDonald's. They had just purchased a new vehicle and went out to celebrate the purchase at a local McDonald's. The wife, for some reason, decided she had better check the spare tire and make sure they had one before they left town, and found a gun instead. I received a call from the wife stating she just accidentally shot her husband. When I was asking about exit wounds, she said it did not penetrate but burned him real badly. Turns out, wife shot the husband with a flare gun when she went to show it to him. They did not finish their Big Macs, and I'm not sure how that marriage ended up. He wasn't a happy man on the way to the emergency room to get burn treatment. Former Sheriff's Department dispatcher in charge of non-emergency and 911 calls for a rural southern county. I picked up the job part-time and was in the process of training. My supervisor was sitting next to me listening to my end of the call, but she was not hooked into the line to hear the whole call. Line rings, I answer. It's 911. A young girl, less than 10 years old, is telling me that she, her mother, and her baby sibling are locked in a bedroom. Her uncle is pacing around outside the door holding a knife and threatening to kill them all. She does not know the house number/fire number where they are, and mom is basically checked out of the conversation out of fear. I have a vague idea of where she is, so I send deputies in her direction with the promise that I will get better directions. As is typical in rural areas, everybody owned a scanner and listened like it was their job. My phone starts ringing off the hook, so I am reassuring this little girl on one headset and holding a second headset up to my other ear taking directions from concerned members of the public. Directions like, go until you see a broke down truck, keep going. When you get to the second broke down truck, turn right and continue until you see a large rock. It was also late enough in the evening that everything was dark out. The little girl tells me there might be a back door that is unlocked. Members of the public who know the house just from the general location and number/gender of occupants are calling in confirming that there is a back door that my deputy should enter through and that they will not be seen by the perpetrator if he has retreated to the living room. My guys arrive, sneak in the back, walk right up to the guy sitting in a recliner, disarm him, and arrest him. Family gets emergency protective orders so he, ideally, cannot be a threat to them again. I almost quit after that call because my adrenaline was running. I was shaking, and I'd had to handle it mostly myself because my supervisor couldn't hear what was going on. I stayed with it, and it was one of the best jobs I had. I quit when I moved to another state, but it was a sad decision to make. Edit, I would like to add that the whole not being able to find your house in the country thing was extremely common back then, and I cannot speak to current systems in rural areas. I also got extensive public help via scanner listeners the time a home security company called to report a possible break-in or medical emergency, but they only had a billing address on file, no directions to the house whatsoever. If you have any kind of company servicing your home, make sure they have your actual street address/fire number and a backup detailed set of directions to your home, including landmarks. I don't want to ever see anyone in an easily preventable emergency because ADP doesn't have the details necessary to send someone to your home. Allow me to offer a funny story in place of these serious ones. I was an intern at a local police department and I was working with dispatch for the day. We received a call from a concerned citizen complaint. 911, what is your emergency? I'm sorry, ma'am, could you please speak up? I said there's two guys screwing in a parked truck. Yes, ma'am. We'll get someone out there immediately. The operator hung up and we both immediately started laughing. He had the caller on speaker so I could listen. I asked him if he was going to send someone out there, and he just shrugged and told me sometimes people need some fun. Edit, my newest, most upvoted comment is about butt stuff. Nice. Edit 2, I should talk about butt stuff more often on Reddit. Edit 3, gold for talking about butt stuff. Reddit, I love you so very much. And thank you, most kind and generous stranger. I have much love for you as well. Not an actual 911 call, but I did get a 911 call while working at a tattoo shop. A customer calls me, gives me his address, tells me to not ask questions, come over, don't knock, but rather break a window and come on in. What I find is him and his girlfriend were on the bed doggy style. I say, whoa, I don't mind the show, but I'm not sure if I want to join. Turns out they had gotten their piercings caught. The bar at the base of his had gotten caught in her hoop. Not a 911 operator, but Grandma was a telephone operator back in the day when operators actually connected calls. First call ever on first day on the job. Kid zipped his junk in a zipper. She said she could hear the kids screaming in the background. So, she put it through to the fire department because, quote, I figured they were all guys there, so they know what to do. Today, my mom slipped on ice and broke her ankle. The person whose house she fell in front of came out and yelled at us when I came to help, saying I wasn't her son and how dare I use his driveway. Reddit, what moments have you had where you just thought, what is wrong with you? Title pretty much says it all. My mom slipped and it looks like her ankle is broken. I got there to help, pulled my car into his driveway to back it up next to her on the street, and he came out and yelled at us. My mom told him that I'm her son and she called me to help, and he just kept yelling about how he saw us from his roof and wondering what I was doing using his driveway. After that, we just decided to ignore him since we had bigger problems to deal with. But in my mind, I was thinking, why does it matter who I am or why I pulled into your driveway? You can see her on the ground. You can see her screaming in pain. Does it really matter right now? What is wrong with you? Any interesting stories from Reddit about people being just downright idiots about things that don't matter? I was in the car with my grandma on a large 4-lane road in town. A car next to us sideswiped us. Pretty hard, actually. So we pulled over to do the whole information exchange thing. The woman in the other car leaps out and starts screaming at my grandma, saying, "You are the rudest person I've ever seen. You wouldn't let me over. I had my blinker on." I was completely taken aback. My grandma is the sweetest old lady, and had either of us actually seen her blinker, I know Graham would have let her over. But there was heavy traffic, and her car was directly beside us. I dealt with the beast in the Camry and got her insurance. She ended by saying, "This isn't my fault. That woman should let people over." I laughed, which took her aback. I said, "You're 100% at fault here. And by the way, a blinker is not a yield sign even if we had seen it. Learn how to drive before you hurt or kill someone." Then we left. I was pretty happy when Graham told me her insurance had accepted liability, and the agent told her something to the effect of, quote, "Yes, she yells at us too." Pretty minor compared to a lot of these, but back when I was 13 or so, my cousin and I were at a small town Mardi Gras parade. We found a convenient spot and stood there waiting for the parade to start. About 30 seconds later, a man tapped my cousin on the shoulder and started cussing her and me out big time for, quote, being in his way, freaking kids, no respect these days, raised by TV and single moms, etc. I turned around and saw an empty folding chair about 30 feet from the roadway, presumably his. Yes, people do set out folding chairs to watch parades, but they usually set them up about 5 feet away from the road, not 30. Yes, we were standing in his way, but that's like yelling at someone for skipping you in the grocery line when you're standing in the produce section. Be there or don't. And as simple, "I was here to watch the parade and you're standing in front of me. Could you please find somewhere else?" would have worked. He didn't have to automatically go to "freaking kids with no respect." Out of spite, he got to stare at the backs of our heads for the next half hour instead of the parade. We caught lots of beads. I used to work in a record store, and during one of our busy moments of the day, a coworker started to have a seizure up at the cash registers. I immediately stopped ringing up a customer to go help my coworker and try to figure out what to do. About 2 minutes into helping my coworker, whom everyone could see was needing help, a customer asks if we could hurry up and check them out. I remarked that I'm sorry I was busy helping someone that was having a seizure and they'd have to wait a couple minutes. Of course, the customer gives me an angry, frustrated look and starts back-talking. After I get the situation taken care of, I go to check the customer out, and all they were trying to buy was a CD for 25 cents. Upon the customer leaving, they remarked that they would never come back because of the slow service. Good riddance. That always cracked me up, where Karens or Kevins are yelling at customer service, and they leave saying, "You just lost a customer." Yeah? And? There are thousands more. You're not paying my bills. I don't care. When I was 21, I got my first big kid job, so I decided to buy myself a new, used, car since my clunker was awful. I got a beautiful Pontiac G6. I loved it. Exactly 3 weeks after I bought it, I had to go back to the dealership to sign some paperwork so I could lower my car payment. My mom came with me. I was driving back home, going about 35 miles per hour, minding my own business, and this old man in a Chevy Avalanche, about 80 years old, pulled out of a parking lot right in front of me. Had he floored it, I would have barely missed him if I slammed on my brakes. However, he stopped to make sure nobody was coming from the other direction. I slam on my brakes, blare my horn, then T-bone his truck. The front end of my car was barely there. fluids leaking all over, airbags all in my face. My mom and I both got hurt, and this jerkwad decides to get out of his truck and start screaming at me, asking me why I hit his car, what is wrong with me, etc. I looked like I was all of 16 at the time, so I'm sure he thought he was right in his old brain of his. He kept physically coming toward me, swearing at me, screaming, even when the cop came. Finally, after 10 minutes of screaming, he asked if we were okay, to which my mother went off on him, that we weren't okay and he had no right being on the road. Come to find out, he hadn't had a valid license for a few years. Seriously though, how did he think that I hit him on purpose? I once had a guy tell me that he wasn't subscribed to Am I the Genius or Am I the Jerk linked in the description below, and I was like, what is wrong with people? But seriously, if you like what you're hearing, give us a like and a subscribe. My gran fell on the curb in front of my house when she was getting out of the car and broke her hip. She was lying on the ground crying when she said a stranger passed. My gran asked her to just knock on her front door, and the person just stared at her and kept walking, and my gran waited an hour until my dad came out and found her. What kind of person just stares at a little 80-year-old woman crying on the ground? Screw that person. I once parked my car on the street, completely legally, when visiting a friend. Some guy comes running out of the house yelling at me, saying that that was his parking spot. He had a large driveway that could easily park 6 cars, but here he is, yelling at me for parking on the street I was completely and totally, morally and legally entitled to park on. I pointed to the street sign saying it was okay to park, and he yelled, "I don't care what the sign says, you idiot! Move your car or you'll regret it!" I ignored his threat and went to visit my friend. It was a late night, and I came out at about 3 a.m. to drive home, only discovered that someone, wonder who, had let the air out of all my tires. Luckily for me, I own an air compressor, so I hooked it up to my car's cigarette lighter and pumped the air back into my tires. For reference, this post was made 11 years ago, back when more than 2 cars on the road had cigarette lighters. It was cold out and not the greatest compressor in the world, so it was a miserable 20 minutes or so. Once I was done, I returned the favor, letting the air out of all of the tires in the 4 cars in his driveway, as well as his boat trailer. I also superglued his mailbox closed. That made me feel better. I worked at a small, food stand-like place once in Disney World. We closed at 3 every day after lunch, and were right next to another food place that remained open. Well, this day, a man came up to our window at around 3:30. We had already closed everything, and demanded food. I told him nicely that all of our kitchen had been closed, but there's a similar restaurant, literally like 15 yards away, that served the same items. Well, he freaked out, started screaming and complaining about the service in front of his children and a bunch of other kids. He even called one of my coworkers a moron. I know he was fully aware of Disney's policies to never let anyone go unsatisfied. Maybe he'd get free stuff, right? Well, he did. Food and drinks. As he was given his food that came from the neighboring kitchen, I remember I gave him the most "what is wrong with you" look I had ever given, even in risk of losing my job for not looking, quote, Disney happy when around a guest. The part that tipped me off most is that he acted like that in front of his children and was rewarded. He didn't even say thank you. I was managing a restaurant on a busy weekend when the tornado sirens went off and the radio told everyone to take cover immediately. My hosts ran to take cover and call their kids at home. Some jerkwad customer decides to start yelling at me to seat him immediately, that was ridiculous, he didn't need to take cover. A tornado did hit, about a mile away. I was on the bus to a shopping mall and it was very crowded. Upon arriving, people massed for the doors, and when following behind the torrent of people, in my own pace, I suddenly see an old, 70 to 80 years, woman silently frantic, standing in the middle of the massing crowd trying to get the attention of someone, with tears streaming down her face. Everyone in the entire bus just went by her, some pushing, others commenting, but all ignoring. I ask her what's wrong, and she points to the front of the bus where I see a pair of legs sticking out below the bus, in front of the front wheel. "I can't pull him out, it's my husband," she cries. Apparently, her very old husband was hit in the head by the mirror of the bus as the couple was waiting to get in, and he was unconscious and bleeding. The bus driver hadn't even noticed anything, so while I checked up on the husband, the bus driver closed the doors and initiated a pull-out into traffic. I had to slam the glass really hard to get his attention, and if it wasn't for traffic blocking the road, he would have pulled out regardless, thinking I was just a disgruntled, late, would-be passenger. What sickens me about this experience is that some people are so busy with their own little lives that they are willing to ignore the tears of a crying old helpless lady practically brushing up against them because it might mean that her obvious discomfort might require excessive burdening aid from them that just doesn't fit the planned schedule. What is wrong with some people? Update due to interest. The man was, as far as I know, alright after I had pulled him out as gently as I could and provided basic care. I don't know the term in English, but I put him into a position I learned from first aid courses. He had taken a huge gash in the head, but when the paramedics arrived, they said that I did the right thing and will take care of him now. The paramedics' calmness was either incredibly professional and disconnected or just experienced, but I felt at ease afterwards. Never heard from them. For a while, I worked at a gas station, and most of the time I had to sit in a small building and just watch what went on outside. I was doing a bit of paperwork one day when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. One customer was waving frantically to me, the pump hose in one hand with no nozzle and gas spraying everywhere. I slammed the emergency stop button and alarms started going off everywhere. I ran outside with the absorption powder to try to get this massive spill under control, and at the same time, I was trying to explain to the people that were coming up to me why the pumps weren't working. At this point, I was a bit unconcerned with customer service. My number one priority was to get this dangerous spill under control. The guy who broke the nozzle felt it was a good time to come up to me and tell me, quote, "I need a refund for all that gas." You know, I understood that because the gasoline was shooting out onto the ground instead of his tank. He would eventually need his money back. But while the gasoline is still on the ground and I'm desperately trying to clean it up so that nobody gets hurt, that is not the right time to demand a refund. Fortunately, my manager came out. He had to call the fire department and tell them not to come, and he dealt with this guy and all the people that he felt the need to tell me that they were, quote, "in a hurry and when would the pumps come back on." Every year there's a Greek festival here in Richmond, Virginia, and all the people in the neighborhoods around there get a little angry about it because of all the people parking. But some people take it farther and actually put out obstructions, like chairs with orange tape between them or cones, to block people from parking in front of their house. The problem with this is that it's public parking, so they're really just being crybabies, which is why I like to find some house close to the festival that's done this. I get out of my car, throw the cones into the person's yard, and park right there. Screw them. I'm only going to be at the festival for as long as it takes to get food because it's usually hot as heck. One time some guy came out screaming at me about how I was breaking the law and he was going to call the cops and have me arrested and my car towed. I just looked at him and said, "No, you won't, because I haven't broken any laws." So I got my food all boxed up, and I'm walking back to my ride, enjoying the heck out of one of the 5 gyros I bought. One for now, one for later, one for later, one for my ex-wife, and one for her later. And I see a cop car blocking me in, and the cop standing on the sidewalk with the jerkwad berating him. Cop had a very tolerant expression on his face, so I just walked up and said, "Hey dude, sorry, officer. I got all my food and I'm ready to head out. I've got the family waiting for dinner," holding up the bags. "Any way you can move the cruiser a few feet and I could be on my way? Or are you going to be busy for a while yet?" The jerkwad's eyes widen and he starts jabbering about how I'm the one and telling the cop to arrest me now, impound my car, on and on. Cop looks at me, gives me a slight nod, and says, "Nope, I'm pretty much done here. How are the lines? I'm kinda hungry, and the guys back at the station love gyros." So I told him the lines are moving pretty fast and the tzatziki was extra tangy this year. The jerkwad is just gaping at us. So the cop says, "Sir, if you don't take care of this trash by the time I'm done moving my cruiser, I'll have to cite you for littering. And don't block off the street again," and goes to move his cruiser. By the time I'm loading up and pulling out, with the wave to officer cool as heck, the jerkwad is dutifully picking up his cones and orange tape with a stunned expression on his face, like reality just came crashing down. TLDR, jerkwad tried to block off a parking spot. I took it anyway. He called cops. Cop was cool as heck. Told him to pick up the cones or be cited for littering. I left enjoying my victory gyro and loving life. I was standing at a crosswalk of a fairly busy street one day, next to a woman gabbing on a cell phone, and her little 3 to 4-year-old son toddling around. The woman wasn't making any attempt to look at the kid and wasn't holding his hand. The kid, probably bored by waiting, toddled right past me, jumped off the curb, and started walking into the street. As soon as I saw him leaping off the curb, I instinctively shouted, "Oh no," sprang into action, and ran for him. I managed to grab him by the back of the shirt and yank him back to the curb before the SUV whizzed by at 40 to 50 miles an hour. Obviously, they weren't paying attention either. The boy starts sobbing, of course, because what little kid wouldn't? It was scary. I spun around, and immediately, I met with his mom's face as she proceeds to flip out, screaming about how dare I touch her son and how dare I make him cry. I tried to argue and tell her that I just saved the kid's life when he walked out into the road, but even after hearing that, she just kept calling me nasty names and screaming at me. She may not have noticed me wrestling her toddler from a fate of being vaporized into a fine kitty paste, but given the circumstances, shouldn't she have at least given me the benefit of considering that I was telling the truth? She wouldn't stop screaming incoherent garbage at me, while still holding her phone near her face, mind you. Heaven forbid she'd end the call. So eventually, I just shouted back that she should keep a better eye on her son and walk to another crosswalk 2 blocks down. I wasn't expecting a grand hero's parade, but a simple, thanks for not letting my boy become Kinder Jelly would have been nice. Coincidentally, this was near where I lived, and I ended up seeing she and her boy again about 6 months later as they were walking through the neighborhood. She was still on her cell, but this time, the boy was trailing after on a leash. Lesson learned, I guess? TLDR, I saved a kid from being hit by an SUV. His mom gets angry at me. My friend got hit by a car at an intersection. The girl was speeding. After my friend literally flies over the car and lands on the pavement, the driver pulls over and starts to yell at my friend who got hit. She doesn't even take out her phone to call 911 or anything. She just goes on about how, this is the second accident this month. Why weren't you looking? Do you know how much this will cost me? I was thinking, what is wrong with you, lady? You just hit my friend with your car. Shut up. I especially love the part where she said that this was the second accident this month. I think that's a you problem at that point. Literally, so many accidents are preventable if you just look at the road. My mom has had close encounters with deer at least a dozen times, and she's even hit a couple. But she's aware of her surroundings. It's what prevented our car from being a deer paste factory. On my wife's 30th birthday, my mother sent her a happy birthday e-card in the morning. About an hour later, my wife finds out her grandmother had passed away. She, of course, wasn't in the best of moods after that, so decided to just be alone for a couple of hours. Meanwhile, my mother composed an email to my wife several pages long going on about how rude my wife was for not thanking her for the e-card and how she's always been ungrateful and uncaring towards her. My wife called her and calmly informed my mom of why she hadn't replied to her e-card the very instant she got it, and my mom decides to get angry at me for not calling her right away to tell her not to get angry at my wife. When my mom confronted me about it, I only said, if you don't want to put your foot in your mouth, don't open it. When I was a kid, I whacked my elbow on a door handle. May have ruptured a bursa. Man, it hurt. I was maybe 9, and I was screaming in pain, tears running down my face, sobbing, the whole Steven Spielberg. One of my parents' lifelong friends grabbed, physically restrained, everybody who tried to comfort me, saying, oh, he's at his funny bone. He'll be laughing in a minute. It felt like forever, but I guess it was 5, maybe 10 minutes. I'm curled up in the fetal position, holding the elbow and screaming, and I still remember seeing her grab people's arms to pull them back when they reached towards me. Number 1. On that door handle, there was no way I could have hit my funny bone without warping the space-time continuum. Number 2, who the heck has ever laughed from a shot on that exposed nerve? Anyone? Number 3, how long can an allegedly normal human being listen to a child scream and not only decline to help, but actively stop others from helping? And no, the laughing part never happened. In related news, when I met her 10 years later, she was just as prolific a sour of sorrow as I had remembered. That woman never saw me sober as an adult. Every time she showed up, I checked out of reality until she was gone. I was out walking my dog because at the time she was cooped up a lot and I wanted to let her stretch her legs. We walked from our apartment complex to the neighborhood next door. My dog had already done her business and I, a responsible member of society, picked it up and threw it away. While walking past a house, a woman runs out and starts yelling about getting her gun. I thought for sure I had misunderstood her, so I said, "What?" This causes her to run back inside and bring a large man out with her. "What did you say to my wife?" he yelled. I told him calmly that she came out and yelled at me and I was trying to figure out why she was angry. She begins to scream about how my dog, this is the first time I'd ever walked in this neighborhood, was crapping in her yard and she was going to shoot me if she caught it happening. I assured her that I had never been by her house and I was the only one walking the dog. I pointed out that we weren't even slowing down near the house until she came out and threatened to shoot me. But reasoning with morons doesn't exactly work. So instead, she kept screaming, and her giant husband seemed to be getting more agitated. So I just started walking again and avoided their house on the way back out of the neighborhood. That said, it did inspire a hobby. If my dog dropped a lot of poop, I'd pick it up like normal, put it in a plastic sack, and drive over to their house. If the lights were out and the cars were gone, I'd take the bag and empty it on the lawn, right where they'd likely step out of their car when they returned. I never saw it happen, but I always hoped it played out like I planned. Reddit, what's the best rumor you've ever heard about yourself? Not me, but a dude I was in high school with apparently died in a motorcycle accident. Goodbye posts for him flooded my Facebook feed. Days later, we found out he was just playing pool somewhere and had no internet connection. Must have been hilarious for him. After just 2 days of 8th grade, I had E. coli that landed me in ICU for 6 weeks. The rumors spread like crazy about what happened. Some said I was poisoned. Others thought I had stomach cancer. At the varsity football game, the announcer asked for prayers as he told everyone I wasn't expected to make it through the night. No doubt I was really sick, but my favorite was that I was airlifted to Florida for a stomach transplant. Since no human stomachs were available, it was a cow's stomach that would be transplanted. The best part about that is, if the first one didn't work, they have 3 more chances. A few years ago, I volunteered in a desolate little village way up in the northwest corner of Georgia, the country. Then, as now, I was a brown-haired, blue-eyed, ginger-bearded, translucent-skinned Irish American. After 6 months of teaching, I left the village for a week or 2 of summer vacation. By the time I'd returned, a rumor had spread among the villagers that I was actually black. Dato told me that you are black. Okay, well, who told Dato that? He just said he heard it around. Alright, but look at me. How am I black? I don't know. They say that you are black, but you're lying about it. This went on for a month or 2. Then a rumor started spreading about the Irishman in the next village over that he had gone on a bender in Tbilisi, blown all his money, and hiked some 150 miles home. So that took the heat off me for a while. I started in the kitchen, and every time I would walk in, someone would turn off the ceiling fan and everyone would be suspiciously quiet with their pots and pans. Turns out the boss convinced them that I was some super-duper secret soldier friend of his who had come back with shell shock. Ceiling fans reminded me of choppers, and loud noises will send me into a rage. It was hilarious because I'm the most laid-back, passive dude ever. I got straight tackle-hugged by the 300-pound guy who taught me how to fix Xerox copiers. He had heard one of his ex-students died, and he thought it was me, so when he saw me on the street, he was stoked. Pretty sweet, considering it was only a 2-week class. Was just recently. Apparently I quit my job and started a poster-making business. Definitely not the case and weirdly specific. When I was in high school, I made out with a girl who knew one of my best friends. I found out a few days later, from my friend, that the girl was telling people we had slept together, and that I was apparently really good. We take those? When I was in high school, I burned my wrist while taking a pizza out of the oven, so I had to wear a bandage for a few days for it to heal. Some girl that was in my French class told people that I tried to end my life. She also asked me, "Did you end your life at one point?" Yes, I ended my life and I'm dead now. That's why I'm sitting here. Man, when I was in high school, there's this kid we'll call Micah. He was a straight-up jerk all the time, but he never touched me. He always just used words. Liked to talk a lot of crap about me, as much as possible it seemed. He started rumors about me all the time, and the weird thing was, I never really understood why. Like, I had never done anything to this dude. Anyway, in 10th grade, my mother, sister, and I went on vacation to Virginia, and we were gone for like a week. When I came back, everyone was keeping their distance and making weird faces at me when I walked by. My best friend came up to me and was like, "Micah told everyone your family all got body lice, and you had to be out of school for a week while you were getting rid of it." I tried to shake it off and not worry about it, but it was really freaking bothering me. That day after school, I was waiting on my ride, and Micah was also waiting on his ride. So I confronted him in front of like 15 other people and asked him why he was always talking crap and spreading lies. He tried to act tough a couple of times, but I wouldn't back down and told him, basically, in so many words, that this was going to be a fight and that we were past the point of talking. And that little coward ran from me. And so, a new rumor got started that Micah was a coward. only that rumor was true. And then he later got kicked out of school for selling pills to people, so I feel like everything worked out in the end. That I was in a drugs gang and moved away from a city because of rival gangs. I moved from London out to the countryside when I was 14 to 15 because my family hated the city. Just before we moved, one of my close friends was murdered by a gang that thought he was somebody else. He was completely innocent. It was just a case of mistaken identity. There's a picture online of him, me, and a few other friends. Someone at my new school saw this picture and assumed because my friends were all tough-looking black guys that they must have been in a gang, and I was friends with a guy that just got murdered in gang-related activity. People thought I was awesome, and so many of the popular kids wanted to be my friend because they thought I dealt white powder. The funniest interaction was a guy who shouted something at me, and I just told him to screw off and walked away. He's twice my size and could easily kick my butt, and starts wanting to fight, but his friends quickly step in and say how he should be scared because I know people that would mess him up. All of this wore off once they actually spoke to me and realized I was just another nerdy kid that happened to be friends with tough-looking people, one of which was murdered. Basically, people from the countryside were scared of black people and anyone that is friends with them. That I was gay. Somehow, they knew before I knew. I saw in an online forum thread that apparently I've taken up pizza baking as my new career. When the moon hits your eye like when you press subscribe, that's amore. And subscribe to Am I the Jerk too. Link in the description. This week, she's sleeping with the boss. We saw them share a bottle of wine after work. What an unfaithful woman. The guy's married with kids. The following week, she's a lesbian. During the party, she was hugging the girls while singing karaoke. Make up your mind! I can't be sleeping with my boss who's male if I'm a bloody lesbian, you twats! When I was in high school, for reasons unknown, I guess it went around that I was gonna bring a bomb into school. With this rumor going around, a lot of kids avoided me and often talked about me behind my back. Now, I found this situation hilarious and petty, so I decided to start pushing it along. I started carrying my lunch in a small wooden box that I carried around with the rest of my stuff that I would keep underneath my desk. When asked by other students what it was, I would reply along the lines of, "It's not your problem," or, "You'll find out eventually." Eventually, this drew a lot of attention, and a couple days later, the principal called me into his office, stating that I was causing a mass panic, that he called my mother and that he needed to see what was in the box when she arrived. Alas, it was only my lunch, and I played dumb to the rumors, and my mother was angry that she came all the way here just to see what I packed for lunch. Great times. When I was 13, I was dating a 17-year-old cheerleader. A kid saw me going into her house a couple times a week and sometimes in the yard together. Truth, our moms were friends, and my mom hired the cheerleader to tutor me because I know math goodly. That I was dating an older woman for cash. It was in my last year in high school. I started to work out and wear clothes that fitted me better, and somehow people concluded that my transformation from ugly duck to not-so-ugly swan had something to do with an older woman paying me for intercourse. More than one teacher tried to help me to, quote, get out of this life. God bless them. When I was 16, they had just put up goalposts in our local park. Me and a couple of friends were playing a game where you take 3 steps in the 6-yard box and then jump and grab onto the crossbar. It was too easy, so I decided to try and make it with just 2 steps. I ended up just getting my fingertips onto the crossbar, falling hard on my back, and pretty much snapping both my forearm bones in my right arm. I had to spend the night in hospital and missed a day of school. When I came back with my arm in a cast, these are just some of the reasons my friends had told people I'd been off. Toby, a boy in year 7 at our school who was a legit giant, must have been at least 6 foot at 12 years old, mugged me for my Aerobie Pro, shouted, "Toby smash!" and broke my arm. A huge dog knocked me down. I got hit by a car. I got hit by a car trying to get my Frisbee back from Toby. They pretty much changed the story for every person they told. We all got a good laugh out of it. Because I skateboard, I must love rough intercourse. I mean, I do love rough intercourse, but it's not because I skateboard? How are the two even remotely related? Visited Samoa in 2009 while a tsunami hit. A friend back home spread a rumor throughout our school that I was swept by the wave and broke both of my legs and almost died. Supposedly, 2 people cried for me. I returned to college at 30 after breaking up with my boyfriend and moving in with my sister. I made new friends, and most of them were couples. probably because my new friends were in their 30s and 40s. Lots of times, folks were having barbecues or dinners at their houses, and I was catching rides to get there with random sets of friends because the car I purchased with cash was a hoopty. Sometimes I stayed over at people's houses because I had to get up for school in the morning and their house was closer. Whoever picked me up that week was obviously the couple I was currently sleeping with. That rumor went around for 3 years before I figured it out. I used to work in a secondary school. The rumor with the kids was that over the summer holidays, I left to fight The Undertaker. I didn't put them straight on that one. Sports day in school. Girlfriend's best friend told literally everyone that would listen that when I sat down on the bench after my race, she could see my dink in the gap between my shorts and my leg and that it hung down by the side of my leg. To quote her, "He's hung like a horse." I'm really not, but I was grateful for the amount of female attention I received after that. When I was first starting out in the workforce, my boss liked to give me all the fire drills to figure out the solution to. One day, he yells over to me, "Noob, I hope you have your fire hat and suspenders on. This is a big one." Smart jerk me replies, "No, but I have a big hose." A woman in her 40s looked at me for a second, then fell on the floor laughing. The rest of my tenure at that company, I would occasionally hear folks talking about my big hose. True story. I had a, quote, screw buddy years back in Austin, Texas. We will call her Hooks. She was 100% liberated sexually. We would have all kinds of intercourse, usually late night after my long shift and after she was done riding bikes with friends. I would insist on rinsing myself off and she would usually do the same. We would have all kinds of intercourse, often exhausting, so afterwards I would cook, usually some kind of sandwich, grilled PB&Js with molasses, turkey bacon BLTs, and grilled blue cheeses, to name a few. She was a member of a local punk cycling family, is the best way to describe it. I sold drugs around town, mostly weed and hallucinogens for my bicycle coincidentally. As we got closer, I became part of her social circle. Of course, she introduced me as, quote, the guy I am screwing who has that dank weed. On my own social accord, notwithstanding my narcotics, I became a valuable and reputable member of the gang. Well, our time together was short-lived. When the leader of the gang became single, she and him became exclusive. She informed me of this decision after the last time we had intercourse. So, here I am. I gained a wonderful group of friends, but lost my most functional screw buddy ever. After a party, I was drunk and lonely, so I headed home to pleasure myself and go to sleep. As I am leaving, I see a female who was at the party waiting by the curb of the driveway, and as I passed her to ride towards my house, she joins me. She's going that way anyway. She keeps talking about how she has no weed at home and all she wants is to get high before she goes to bed, so I offered to sell her some weed. When she gets to my house, I go to my kitchen to process her order and she goes to the bathroom, but I hear my shower running. She's taking a shower. She comes out of the shower soaking wet and I hope you know the rest. An hour or so later, she asks me what kind of sandwich I'm going to make. I gave her the most puzzled look. She says this, Hooks is always talking about you. He likes them dirty but clean. Good weed, good dink, and he makes after-intercourse sandwiches. That I was a real Indian witch. That's when I learned if you have a lot of black clothes in your closet and are fairly good-looking and happen to be private about your life, no public social media accounts, rest assured you're a witch. That I'm a pimp when not in work. According to the rumor, as soon as I leave the building, I go around the corner, where there's a Ferrari, my enforcers, and a couple of my girls waiting with my pimp coat, hat, and cane. Somebody up there likes me. Heard that one numerous times from the nuns when I was a janitor at a parochial school. I thought they meant the priest was going to promote me to head custodian. Nope, they were just talking about God. Apparently was dating 6 different coworkers in 2 months of work, all at separate times. In reality, I was one of the few guys at said job capable of talking to and getting along with whoever I worked with. I have a bunch of female friends that said they thought I was a womanizer upon meeting me. Couldn't be farther from the truth, really. That I'm dating my former French teacher from high school. He was my Latin teacher. This is actually an amazing story, well worth the read, and I only heard it a couple days ago, so it's weird that I've just seen this thread. So I'm talking to this girl who I went to primary school with. I haven't seen or spoke to her in 10 or so years, but we found each other recently over social media. Call her B. It's worth mentioning I was born in Africa, then moved to the UK where I grew up. B told me a couple days ago that there was a rumor at primary school that I once got chased by a rhino. I was mixed race in a predominantly white school, so there was loads of excitement when I got there, but I never heard rumors. I find this hilarious, because I'm fast, but obviously I can't outrun a freaking rhino, so I go and tell my mom. Mom looks at me and laughs. She says, "You didn't get chased by a rhino as a child, but I did." Then she tells me the story of when she was a little girl living in the bush in Tanzania. Her dad, my granddad, was a station master. There was only one train track and one train passed a day. She was playing and then she heard screams. Men came running by, shouting, "Rhino, run!" So Mom starts running and everyone splits. The rhino is confused and switching targets. Then she remembers her dad telling her, large animals are afraid of anything larger, faster, and that makes more noise, like a train. So she runs over to the tracks near her dad's station as fast as she can and crosses them, then turns to look behind her. The rhino is snorting and stamping its hooves and kicking up dust on the other side of the tracks, but it won't cross. She escaped near certain death. I never heard this story before 2 days ago, because I never heard the rumor about me being chased by a rhino. It's likely that years and years ago, my mom tried to tell someone in my primary school her story, and either due to English being her second language, someone misunderstood her and thought she was talking about me, or some kid overheard and bent the truth. But yeah, that's the best rumor I've heard about myself, which actually turned out to be the truth and not about me at all. My mom is a genius. If she panicked and didn't think of the tracks, no one would be alive to tell the tale. She also has loads of other stories of dangerous animal encounters from when she grew up that she told me after. Moral here, guys, is to talk to your parents more. I had no idea my mom was so freaking awesome. Slipped in some mud next to a busy road on my way to school and was so weighed down with bags I couldn't get up. Plus, my hand really hurt, which later turned out to be torn ligaments. Driver passing pulled over, instantly thought I had been hit by a car, so rang an ambulance despite my protests. Meanwhile, the school bus went by, and thanks to teenagers with wild imaginations, by the time I got back to school a couple of hours later, I had been hit by an ambulance, broken every bone in my body, and died. Someone even said, "We thought you were dead," when I walked into class. There was a rumor when I was in middle school about me being Jewish. It circulated for a long time, but didn't cause me any harm, really. I did have many people over the course of a few months ask me, though. The strange part is that this was in a Catholic school I went to for 2 years prior. Really not interesting, but my husband's dad's, for the past several years my husband's, company is based in a small town, and there are always rumors around that we're either selling or going bust. We have been around for around 60 years and are still the biggest of our industry in our town, while expanding into other areas. When a former employee turned competitor, we prefer to work alongside our competitors rather than hurt them. Started spreading the rumor that my husband was sleeping with the staff, I was ready to go postal on said former employee. Husband said, quote, "They've been trying for 60 years to bring us down. This isn't going to work either." And he's right. We're more successful than ever. TLDR, be graceful and hold your head up in business. Competitors will show their true colors. When I was in high school, I moved from Los Angeles to Columbus, Georgia, and switched high schools between junior and senior year there. Already being from California and talking funny, people kind of stayed away from me. When I switched schools in Columbus, I went from a mostly white school to a mostly black school. I'm black, but I didn't fall right into the sagging pants and lunchtime rap battles. I sat by myself a lot at lunch and liked to read my assignments and do homework at lunch so that I had more free time when I got home. Well, I found out towards the end of the year that because I listened more than I talked and often sat by and people watched, people judged, that everyone thought I was an undercover cop and was there to spy on the kids. And I'm not ashamed to say that I let them believe that until the rest of the school year. That I have killed a man twice. No, not 2 different men, but I heard at 2 different times in my life 2 different versions of how I killed the same man at 2 completely different times for 2 completely different reasons. Stopped by a casual friend's house to see if he was around. Realized after I'd already rung the bell that I had a lit cigarette in my hand. Was 16 at the time. Was about to flick it away when his mom answered, so I quickly flipped it around my fingers, so my hand was sort of covering it, and tried to keep it behind my back. It was a breezy day, but she must have seen the smoke, and because she already didn't like me too much, she made the worst possible assumption, that I was holding a lit joint behind my back. Told her son I came over with the joint, and he then spread the falsehood to all sorts of other people at school. At that point, I hadn't even tried weed yet. I think that was the following summer. Just one in a long series of misunderstandings from my childhood. I was awkward, nerdy, and socially bereft, and people wonder why I never go to the reunions. When I was in college, I used to solve all the lab assignments in advance for a particular course and post the tutorials online in a forum accessible only by students and not faculty members. The course and the lab assignments were extremely difficult, but I loved it, so I had no problem sharing the work I've done. The forum was anonymous, and you would use a nickname to post. Then one day, a friend of mine calls me and tells me he overheard 2 students talking on the bus. No, believe me, blank is not a student. It's an alias used by course teaching assistant to share lab solutions with us. Otherwise, nobody would solve them. It also catches those who copy-paste it. Fun fact, the course assistant later figured out that I was the one writing the tutorials and did nothing. The same lab assignments were used for the next 6 years. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.